And welcome to the Krueg Show, everybody. Maybe we should get the band rolling here for a few seconds before we get it rolling. Monday on the Krueg Show after the 49ers lose at Philly. Might have to scoot up a little bit. Anyway, welcome to the Krueg Show on a Monday. Black Monday. 49ers lose 31-7. Big day today on the show. Big day. Big day. What do we got planned today? That's enough of the band. So we're going to do this live stream right here. Jordan Elliott's going to join us in a bit. We're going to visit with Jordan Elliott. Jordan Elliott's really good. Niners Nation, I think, is one of the better Niner publications out there. He does a great job covering the 49ers for them, and always an interesting guy to talk to about all things 49ers. So we'll visit with Jordan Elliott. We'll get his thoughts on the game today, on the game yesterday, and he's going to join us. We're also going to take your video calls. If I could just put the video deal in the chat for everybody. If you want to get in via video calls, we could take your video calls and want to. So I'm going to put that in there right now. There you go. And boom. So now you have the link if you want to jump in. I do want to hear from real Niner fans on yesterday's game. I'll say this before anybody gets in on anything. That was the worst championship game I have ever seen in my entire life. I mean, I've never felt worse watching a football game than that game. That was the least enjoyable football game I have ever seen in my entire life. When your starting quarterback is out of the game 6 plays into the game and you don't have a backup, God bless Josh Johnson. I did an interview with him. Go to YouTube, check out my interview with him. Good guy, local guy, great guy. In fact, one of my wife's good friends her sister taught him at Oakland Tech. So we talked about this year in the locker room, and he's a great guy, Bay Area guy, rooting for him. Terrific guy. Can't say enough good things about Josh Johnson, which is why he's around on so many teams and has been around for so long. But he was only signed a few weeks ago. The 49ers, I think everybody knew, were basically one deep. And when Josh came in, there was no way the 49ers were going to be able to beat the Eagles in their place. No way. It was game over. I mean, anybody who thought the 49ers had a chance after Brock Purdy went out, it's just, maybe you're too optimistic because, they have this like next man up philosophy that you hear so much in football. Oh, next man up. That's a myth. That's all dependent solely on who's the next guy. And I don't want to disparage Josh, but it's going to come across that way. But he just was not ready for this moment, wasn't expecting to play. And didn't play well. So, and I'm not putting this on him because it's not on him. But when Purdy went down, the game was over. You know it, I know it, and that's the way it all shook out. As far as, and this is like almost like older Niner fans, this is almost like a recurrence of history. The Niners were one of the best teams in pro football, if not the best team in pro football, throughout most of the 1980s and 90s. In the 80s, when they didn't make it, it was usually because somebody literally knocked out Joe. You know what I mean? If you were going to beat the 49ers, you had to knock out Joe Montana. And the Giants did that in 85 before the Bears took them apart. The Giants did that again, I think, in maybe 86 with Jim Burt. The Giants definitely did that in 90 when Leonard Marshall took out Joe Montana at Candlestick, and the Niners finished with Steve Young. So, the 49ers, a lot of years, how many Super Bowls would the 49ers have had if their quarterbacks hadn't gotten knocked out? Probably a few more would be in the trophy case. And I think the 49ers, based on what I saw from the rest of that game, and it's hard to evaluate either side in a game like that after something big happens, like the quarterback going down. But after that happened, I thought that pretty much the Niners were done. But the way the Eagles looked after that made me think that if Purdy had stayed in the game, that the 49ers would have won that game yesterday. Impossible to say for sure, but that was my impression of it. Now, did the Eagles take their foot off the gas pedal? Possibly. Did they call a much more conservative game, knowing that it wasn't going to take as much? They didn't have to take as many risks to beat this version of the 49ers. Likely that's the case. So you can't take everything at face value. Every play in a football game impacts the next play, the next coverage, the next play call, the next everything. So you can't pick and choose and take little pieces like that and throw that in there. Let's welcome in Jordan Elliott. And guys, we will get to the calls. If you guys are hanging in the green room, we will get to your calls, but I want to get Jordan in here first. Jordan, good to see you, man. I was saying, Black Monday here for the 49ers, but I was just talking about how, for me, off the start, that it's hard to evaluate yesterday because the game, in my opinion, was over 6 plays into the 49ers' first drive. And I don't think Kyle Shanahan's play calls throughout the rest of the game can be evaluated as part of his plan. This was part of his second plan. And everything that happened after that, it's like, I guess we can get into it. We will, but the game was over when Purdy went down. That's just the reality of it. We found out just now that he has got a UCL tear. Now, it's not going to be a full Tommy John reconstructive elbow surgery, but they're saying that he should be out at least until training camp or mini camp at least. He's going to undergo surgery, UCL torn, sideline him for 6 months is the diagnosis. What'd you think? What'd you think about the game yesterday? I'll just throw it in your lap that way.
Yeah, absolutely. The column I wrote for Niners Nation that went up this morning kind of reflected this feeling of like inconclusiveness and emptiness because we never really got to see this 49ers team with Brock Purdy at the helm, with Christian McCaffrey in the fold, with the majority of this roster healthy, taken down at full strength. We didn't get to see them beaten while they were at their best. And I understand a lot of NFL teams in the playoffs aren't healthy and guys aren't near 100%. But really, since that Chiefs game, once McCaffrey was fully, a part of the offense and had time to learn the playbook, and obviously with Brock Purdy under center, this team was steamrolling opponents. And it just feels so unfulfilling to see like that's how it ended, because if they had gotten beaten by Philadelphia and Purdy had been healthy, I don't think that there would be nearly the same sense of just that like gut punch that it feels like everybody's kind of absorbed because Philly's a good team. They were the 1 seed for a reason. It's just that never ending feeling of like what if and what could have been, because I fully believe if Brock Purdy had stayed healthy, the 49ers had a really good chance to win that game. I thought D'Amico had a great game plan to slow down that Philly offense. I think that it would have been a really hard fought, gritty game. But just as you mentioned, it was over with 7 minutes left in the first quarter. And I think it's just deflating, I think is the word I'm looking for. It was extremely deflating.
Well, and it was so bizarre, too, because it's like you sit down, and I was ready for a decisive something. Either the 49ers are the best team in the conference, and Brock Purdy is going to lead them to the Super Bowl, and wow, what a story this is, or a big slap in the face. Hey, the Eagles have better personnel, and that you're really have problems personnel wise across the board. And I do have a number of personnel topics that I want to get to, but to me, it was neither of those. It was like they're, getting beat by the Giants in the 80s or the Cowboys in the 90s. There was that feeling like they're better. Our team is not as good. Our team needs to get better to run on their level. This game didn't end with like, wow, man, Philly, Howie Roseman, he's built a team that we can't compete with and blah, blah, blah. And it's just, they're on a different level. It didn't have that feeling. It felt like, we don't know. We don't know. It's like, I actually kind of think that the way the game finished, I would probably, if they played again, let's say in 2 weeks and Purdy was going to be healthy, I would take the Niners. I feel good about their ability to beat the 49ers, but taking out the quarterback is like having a NASCAR race where you take out the driver. It's like it's not the same thing. I
You
mean,
know,
and no offense to Josh Johnson, but he wasn't ready for that moment. And then he went out with the concussion. And not to mention, I mean, I don't even want to get back to the refs because I hate ref talk, but that was a false start on the 49ers on the play that resulted in the Josh Johnson fumble. Another call that somehow got blown in this game. Really not the officials' best weekend without, I don't want to get into a long thing about it, but the officials in both games were lacking.
absolutely. And, I agree completely with what you said about the personnel because you know what it felt like? It felt like a heavyweight title fight, like an Ali Frazier kind of fight, right? With these two, I think most people would agree the consensus best rosters in the league. And then you ask one of those fighters to tie a hand behind their back and step into the ring. That's really what it felt like, where we never got to really gauge where these two teams were at on this stage on the same field for 60 minutes. And I think that's the biggest bummer. I do think there were some calls I didn't agree with. And I think there's a big difference, right, between letter of the law, because I think the majority of the calls that were made, letter of the law, were penalties. But you also have to gauge, like, in that moment with two of the most physical teams in the league, are you going to call stuff? Like the one that really stuck out to me was that pass interference they called on Jimmy Ward against A.J. Brown. I thought it was super ticky-tacky. In a playoff game of that magnitude, you got to let guys play. And I don't think that was something that, I personally would have called. I think that that's one of those things where you got to let it play out. And it just felt like once the game really started to get out of hand, like I think it's really difficult to place ourselves in the shoes of these guys where they fought and clawed all season long. And all of a sudden they're in a position where no matter how well they play on defense, their offense can't execute a forward pass. And you start to get frustrated a little bit and you start to see some of those late hits. You start to see some of those penalties building up that otherwise I don't think would have been there. And then it obviously culminated with Trent Williams body slamming the dude into the ground at the end of the game. It was an avalanche of Murphy's Law yesterday. Like everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong for the 49ers. And it's just so unfortunate because they had done the improbable all season long and they looked as poised as ever to make that Super Bowl run with this roster under Kyle Shanahan. And now we're just left with an off season of questions and kind of an eternity of like, what if, because nobody will ever really know what things would have been like had Purdy not gotten hurt.
11 penalties, 3 fumbles. I mean, there's things that you can point to. I thought Michael Lombardi had a point about the officiating that I thought was pretty good. He basically just said, hey, in the early playoff games, it was like, we're going to let them play. And then in this game, there were some really kind of ticky-tack calls. The one that really kind of bugged me was the one against the rookie in the second half, J.P. Mason, who was being held as he's rushing. That's clear. Then it's pretty clear that the Eagles tight end, the backup tight end, threw him into his own kick, into the kicker. And yet, 15-yard penalty. Instead of the Niners getting the ball back, the Eagles extend the drive. Hurts eventually scores a touchdown to make it 28-7. That was a huge play as well. I mean, absolutely huge play. So to me, once again, the game was over 6 plays in. So a lot of this official stuff, I think, is kind of like, that just added on. 3 fumbles, you're not going to win. The trend held true all year. If the Niners were even or plus turnover table wise, they won. When they were negative, they lost. And when you're -3 on the road against a championship caliber club, that right there would have cost you the game. But let me ask you about the first big play to Devontae Smith. Jimmy Ward on the coverage, right? And Fonga, was it Charvarius or Jimmy on that coverage?
I think it was Jimmy, yeah. And it was like a broken scramble drill, kind of like he had run that little drag to the sideline, and then when Hurts got out of the pocket, he turned upfield.
And it went for a 29-yard catch, and it looked like this amazing one-hand grab. And they showed us, I think, 2 different angles after the play, and they both appeared to confirm what we all thought we saw initially live, which is that Devontae just made an amazing catch. And we're all sitting there going, oh, my God, he made an amazing freaking catch. Well, Hufanga is the safety over there, and didn't make a play on the ball, but was 3 feet away and was signaling incomplete That's the first indication that there was a question as to whether or not the ball was caught. Then you've got the receiver himself running to the line, trying to get the play snapped earlier as fast as possible. If you're Shanahan right there, you have to see that and know that those two things alone and just gun that red flag onto the turf. He didn't see it. How blamable do you hold Kyle Shanahan for that play, for not challenging that play? Is that fair to criticize him for not challenging, or was he kind of like the rest of us? Like I thought nothing in the moment, like incomplete. In fact, it seemed like the replays that I saw kind of confirmed it. So I wasn't thinking along those lines, and I never saw Hufanga motion, but according to the reports, he did. How much blame does Shanahan take for that one?
So I think the needed context we would have to feel, definitive about it is what angle did the booth get, like the 49ers booth that's going to radio down to Shanahan, like, hey, there's something up here, like use one of your timeouts or throw the flag, because the way Kyle made it seem in the post-game press conference was that they didn't get that angle until well after, the commercial break, which I believe occurred after the Eagles had scored their touchdown. I know it's the tendency of some teams to just get into hurry up after fourth down conversions like that, because you kind of catch a team, out of the personnel that they'd like to be in, especially when you start to get in that condensed area in the goal line. I will say, if Hufanga was adamant that it was incomplete, I do think there's a level of blame on Shanahan where there needs to be a level of trust with your players when they see something like that. It's a different sport, but a lot of Warriors fans watch Niners games too. It feels like every single time Draymond Green, something happens and he's going to Steve Kerr and he's saying challenge, he does the little, hand motion. Kerr does it without question. And I think that if you have a player that's being that adamant that something is up and something needs to be looked at, I think there needs to be a level of trust within, that relationship from coach to player. So that's the one area where I might be a little bit more inclined to feel like, Shanahan made a mistake, because Hufanga had a better view of that than really anybody else on the field. And like you said, while it is a tendency of some teams to go hurry up just to catch teams out of personnel, the way that Smith popped up and they tried to get that playoff, usually that's an indicator that something's up. So I will say that while I don't think it's, as egregious as it may look in hindsight because we didn't get that angle, I do think Shanahan does deserve some of the blame, because he did say, I believe, he thought about challenging it but didn't. So like the thought was going through his head. And I think in some of those moments, you just got to trust your instinct and let that thing go. It's a first half timeout. Like if it was a late, second half, you need those timeouts. You're going to need that to stop the clock. I get it, but it's the first series of the game. You got to have a little bit of willingness to take risks when you're the underdog on the road in a playoff game like that.
Jordan, do you know Kevin Seifert from ESPN?
That name sounds very familiar.
He's a great guy. He covers the league and has for years. I think he's based up in Minneapolis. This is what he tweeted today. He says, yes, the 49ers could have challenged the Eagles' fourth down conversion, but the NFL's replay assist crew also allows the replay official to make a quick reversal without a challenge. They have all the camera angles in the booth, and they don't need to wait for TV to broadcast it. So, yeah, we didn't see the angle that showed the ball coming out until we got back from a commercial. Is that right? Wasn't there?
I believe that's what it was. Yeah, after, because it was well after. I think it was after the Eagles had scored in the commercial break that came out of them scoring after that.
So, yeah, that was so. So somebody in that booth had all of the angles and either didn't have enough time to see it, didn't see it. So it's not just a failure on Shanahan. It sounds like it's a failure also from New York.
Yeah, and I think it's just there needs to be better protocol. Regular season games, like, fine. I understand, pace of play and stuff like that. You don't want to be reviewing every single, close call like that. But in a playoff game, I don't know if you could set it up for, like, reviewing fourth down conversions specifically, given the weight they have on a game like that, or, obviously scoring plays as well. Like, they review every scoring play, right? Would it be that much more difficult to review every fourth down conversion and be able to avoid something like that happening? Because, like, I'm with you, Larry. Like, the game was over when Brock Purdy got hurt, but that still has a major impact in a game that has Super Bowl implications. And I think that While there obviously was the path for Shanahan to challenge it, and I think that there is fair criticism of him not throwing the challenge flag, that's something where the officials in the NFL need to make sure that they're being as accurate as possible and covering as many bases as possible on their own before having to get to a point to challenge it. So I don't know if that's something they could implement, but maybe there's some sort of system they could where you do review those fourth down conversions when there's something like that where it's kind of iffy.
So this now, we're all sitting there watching this, and we're sitting there going, "Son of a!" They're up 7-0, and it would have been and should have been 49er 1st and 10 ball on the 49er 35-yard line going the other way. And instead it's 7-0 Philly, and you feel like you've been robbed already. Okay, so now the Niners' first possession, Purdy hits Kittle on a short crosser, nice little high percentage throw schemed up by Shanahan. McCaffrey got stuffed on 2nd and 1 by Gardner Johnson, who was just awesome, flying around like a madman, seek and destroy. He's just a great player. 3rd and 2, McCaffrey runs for the first down. So that sets up 1st and 10 from the 36. Purdy hits Ayuk for a first down. Penalty. Philly was offsides. They decline the penalty and take the yardage. Then Debo runs 4 yards on first down. Now it's 2nd and 6 at midfield. And this is the play that Purdy gets knocked out on. And, he gets hit by Hassan Reddick. The ball pops out. But more importantly, Purdy's arm obviously was seriously injured. I've watched this play many times. This is another area where people are losing their minds, going crazy about Kyle Shanahan. This is not a Kyle Shanahan issue. If you want to say that Tyler Kroft is not a good enough player, okay, you can make that argument and point at the personnel department. Tyler Kroft didn't just, in the play action game, you're going to ask tight ends sometimes to block defensive ends. You're going to ask wide receivers to get in the way of guys who are better than them and bigger and stronger and faster than them. You're going to be overmatched sometimes in the play action game off the edges. I don't want to say that Purdy blew it because he held the ball too long, or if Kroft blew it. If Kroft loses Reddick on the inside, he blew it. The expectation, if you're Shanahan, is that you're going to hold the guy up, and you're not going to hold him up forever, but you're going to eventually fall off of that block, most likely to the outside. And that's what Kroft did. So if I saw Tyler Kroft, I'd say, hey, it would have been nice to hold that block for a tick longer. But so what? That's like the guy, that's Brett Favre in the commercial as the groceries fall on the ground saying you should have double bagged it, right? I mean, that's 2020 hindsight. I don't think if you really know football, you're going to say that Shanahan calling that play, that Kroft is, that Shanahan somehow caused yesterday's game because he was negligent by asking Kroft to block Reddick. It's a tall ask, but it's not unheard of. I mean, what was your read on that play? How blamable do you blame Kyle for that one?
I really don't. And the reason why is because it's a shot playoff play action. And that's what all 32 NFL teams have those plays in their playbook where they're in a personnel with 2 tight ends. Typically you're going to have one or both back in blocking. And the thing is with there's no winning, right, Larry? Because what we've seen in the past is on those shot plays, he'll have Kittle stay back and block. And then people are upset that Kittle's not being utilized as a receiver and Kittle's not out in the pattern. Well, yesterday Kittle was out in the pattern and Kroft was back blocking. And if you go back, I don't know if people have had the chance to see, I've seen a ton of clips of the all-22 footage on Twitter and stuff. The corner route that Ayuk was running, he was wide open. And if that ball gets out,
a big play.
That's a big play. He might have gotten in the end zone with how wide open he was. There was nothing but green grass in front of him. So I don't think it was a schematic issue. I think it just was a very unfortunate circumstance. And it'd be one thing if Kyle was trying some, way out of pocket, thing that no other team's doing. And he, is trying to outsmart everybody by doing this thing that nobody else does because it's probably a bad idea. Every single team in the NFL has plays like this in their playbook where they're asking their tight ends to hold blocks on the edge on these play action shot plays. And I think Joe Thomas, who's one of the best left tackles, the NFL's ever seen, weighed in on it earlier, where he was kind of mentioning that, this is very run of the mill. And I think it comes down to, it's very easy to be upset at the result, but people act like they're upset with the process. And I never saw people complaining when they were hitting those shot plays for big games when they won 12 games in a row. And I understand the frustration with the result. It sucks. It cost the 49ers a chance to play in a Super Bowl. I completely understand it. But I don't think it's a situation where when that play call is being relayed to Brock Purdy, that's where the issue was. Like the schematics was not the problem. It just came down to execution and really just I think, Larry, what happens oftentimes is people underestimate how fast the NFL game is and how much like a millisecond of time can make all the difference in the world. Because if that ball comes out a little bit sooner, it doesn't really matter if Tyler Kroft gets beat and doesn't hold his block on Hassan Reddick. And I think it's just one of those situations where something really unfortunate happened and Purdy got hit in the worst possible place he could have got hit at the worst possible moment, and he suffered a really bad injury because of it.
Yeah. How does that injury change your thinking about the quarterback room in 2024? I mean, I know we're going right from the game into that kind of seemingly off-season discussion, but it's the off-season for the Niners. So do you bring back Brock? Obviously Brock's coming back, but I mean, do you have Trey and Brock, two young guys? Is Trey an ideal backup for Brock? No. Is Brock an ideal backup for Trey? No. I mean, that's kind of rough. Do you let Jimmy go? Do you go after Tom Brady? Can you get Tom Brady for a year at a low figure? Is he willing to do a solid for? I mean, if Tom Brady, I think playing for the Niners for Tom Brady is about Tom Brady being that much more beloved in his hometown where he plans to live the rest of his life. If you really want to be super beloved, come home for a ridiculous hometown discount and help the team surround you with, an awesome caliber team that's the best in the league. To me, that would be the stuff of lore. If he came back for $1 and somehow led the Niners to a Super Bowl, I mean, that would change the talking points locally forever for sure. What's your read on the quarterback room?
I mean, so the best case scenario for the 49ers is that Trey Lance recovers and he ends up being very good for them as their starting quarterback next year. I think that it would be foolish to argue anything but that would be the most ideal outcome. But is that an outcome that you can count on given the fact that we don't really have a large sample size? He's still in a boot as of yesterday. At this point, they have to push all the chips in towards Brady. And I felt that way for the last 3 years. I know people think he's washed, he's old, he's not good. The reality is, since the 49ers reportedly turned Tom Brady down after that 2020 Super Bowl, early 2020, that offseason, the 49ers have had 5 different starting quarterbacks. They've had injuries all over the place at the position, and Brady has started every single one of the 57 games that he's been a part of as a Tampa Bay Buccaneer, and he won a Super Bowl. And while he may not be the player he was last year, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I still think he played at a really high level this year. I think people's perception of Brady was warped due to the fact that all the Buccaneers could do on offense was throw, and teams knew it. And they're in a lot of these sets, they're going empty, they're splitting out 4 wide, and teams know they're not going to run the ball. Brady had more passing attempts than any quarterback in the history of the league this year. And that wasn't a coincidence. It was because Tampa Bay literally could not run the football. So if you put Brady on a team with a really good defense and you put him on a team that has a good run game and has playmakers, why can't he have a season like Peyton Manning had in 2015? I think Brady right now is far above what we saw from Peyton Manning that year. And the Broncos were a Super Bowl team that year because they had the pieces around him. So if we're getting into a situation where there's any uncertainty with the younger quarterbacks in Purdy and Lance and their recovery and the timeline, I don't see how you can't make a push to bring Brady in and just try to get across the finish line. Because the reality is, when you start looking at the cap situation going forward and you start looking at what guys are owed over the next few years, it's going to be near impossible to keep this core together. And I think you have to do everything in your power to get the most out of this roster right now. And I don't know who would give you a better chance than that, bringing Tom Brady in on a 1 year, whatever it may be. I think he has to be the guy if you can make it happen.
The cap, they said today, is going to be $224.8 million. The 49ers currently have $217 million of liabilities for 2023, but only 35 players under contract. What do you think? I mean, Tom Brady's made a lot of money. The going rate for top-tier quarterbacks is $40 million. I mean, and people say, well, he's lost it. I'm looking at his numbers here. I mean, 25 touchdowns, 9 picks. He completed what, 67%. The year before, 43 touchdowns, 12 picks. The year before that, 40 touchdowns, 12 picks. I mean, I don't see, I mean, 25 is obviously less than 43, but I mean, I thought the chemistry between him and Evans was awful. You have to have a big time offensive line to have Tom Brady. Do they have a good enough O line, or would it be go get Tom Brady and then, the Niners need to need to build up their offensive line whether they get Tom Brady or not, right? Even if they're, look at Brock Purdy's numbers when he was not pressured. I mean, getting a big time offensive lineman or two should be, one of the primary goals of this offseason, regardless. But what do you think? You think Brady would take a hometown discount to come here?
I think he's not going to, do the 49ers any major favors, but I definitely think that there's a path to getting him for below what you mentioned that market rate was. And I think especially when you're able to sell him on the fact that there are the pieces around him. I was sitting here thinking earlier today, I'm like, Brady might watch Mahomes win another Super Bowl in a couple of weeks. And while Brady's kind of distanced himself from every other quarterback to play the game, I think one way he really could cement his legacy as the greatest we've ever seen is if he is able to win another Super Bowl with a third different team. It'd be something that would be near impossible for anybody else to match. And when you think about the on the field fit, plus the off the field, the fact he's mentioned, he wants to be able to play in front of his family who's still in San Mateo, California. He still wants a chance to, be in front of his home, hometown and the area he grew up in and all those things. Like, it just makes too much sense. And it's beyond frustrating that they didn't get it right the first time. There has to be some sort of middle ground. So I'd say if they could get him for somewhere around like 20 a year and maybe work in some bonuses, do some maneuvering, if you can get him in under the cap number this year, you move mountains to do it, because realistically, it's great to have flexibility and be a contender. We don't know when this team's going to be good again. And I would hate to see another talented roster wasted the way we saw it during the Harbaugh years, where you look back and you're like, this was probably the best team in the NFL, and they have absolutely nothing to show for it in terms of Super Bowl trophies, even though they had all that talent amassed.
All right. So I agree with you. I think Brady makes sense, and I think they're at the right point in their history. I think Shanahan and Lynch also are eager to get that sixth Lombardi. They will be made men with Jed, with the ownership group, the family, with the fans, with alums. I mean, they will be, right. They can write their own ticket if they get this done. So, and they don't have a healthy quarterback going into training camp potentially. What's your quarterback room? Is it Brady, Purdy, and Lance?
I feel like you'd have to get somebody in the interim. Like, I'm sure there's probably a rookie or somebody they like in this class, or you bring in somebody like they had Benkert on the practice squad for a bit. They had a guy like Jacob Eason, so I'm sure they'll have like bodies for OTAs. I admittedly haven't gotten too deep into draft stuff this year yet, so there's not really many guys that I would immediately come to mind. But if they're not able to get a guy like Brady, like, there are some interesting names on the free agent list coming up. And I wonder, 49ers fans are going to hate it, but I'm just throwing a name out there. Like, a guy like Sam Darnold might be available, and he might be somebody that Shanahan looks at. They might have liked during the draft process a few years ago, where he's not brought in to be the guy, but you kind of bring in a guy who has experience. And, no offense to Josh Johnson, if you were in that position yesterday and you throw out a guy like Sam Darnold or a guy like Andy Dalton, I think you're in a much better position than a guy like Josh Johnson. And I think there's enough guys that are free agents this year where you can supplement. If the plan is to go in with Trey Lance and he looks like he's going to recover, you can get a quality backup. You can get a guy like Teddy Bridgewater, maybe get a guy like Jacoby Brissett, who can be that reliable safety blanket, because you just have to assume at this point the quarterback is going to get hurt. And it really sucks to say, because nobody wants to go into any season thinking that, but it's just kind of turning into like a fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me type situation, where it's happening year after year and you have to do everything you can to plan for it.
Bruce says if they get Brady, would Gronk come along for the ride? I take Gronk in a second. Are you kidding me?
Absolutely. Could you imagine him and Kittle, just for the interviews alone, him and Kittle in the same locker room? That'd be a good vibe.
Oh my God. Yeah. The locker room interviews would just be, instead of getting 10,000 views on a video, we'd get like 40, 50,000 if you had Gronk in there fooling around. All right. The other major story of the day is D'Amico. It looks like he's out the door. a lot of indications that D'Amico's going to the Texans. You knew the Texans were going to want D'Amico. D'Amico is a great player for the Texans. He's a great guy. And it just, I'm sure they're going to give him a sweetheart of a deal. So that kind of brings up the Vic Fangio rumor. But then there was talk that Vic Fangio over the weekend was going to Miami. Mike Silver from the Chronicle said that Vic Fangio told him directly last night that he's still available, according to him. What do you think's going on there? You think the 49ers are having overtures towards Vic Fangio?
I think that if that is, there's no reason to doubt what Mike Silver's reporting isn't true. And if it is true, I think there's a very real scenario where he is still undecided. And maybe there's an opportunity where Fangio's like, hey, Miami's offering me this, and that's an ideal destination. They got some players in the secondary. They have a good defensive front. But if you're willing to come up and meet this price and match what they're willing to give me, he has ties to the area. He obviously was at Stanford with Harbaugh. He was with the Niners for a number of years. He was seen at the facility, as recently as last offseason. I think there is a realistic chance that the 49ers will be given an opportunity to match whatever Miami's giving him, because as good as Miami's defense is, I don't think there's a better situation for Fangio than the 49ers to step into right away. He's the architect of the modern NFL defense, right? Like, he's the guy that is the mastermind behind this scheme that's causing fits for all these offenses. And it doesn't matter how good your scheme is if you don't have the players to execute it. And I think that's doubly true for defense rather, than offense in the NFL. And there's not another team outside of the 49ers that's going to give him a better chance to come in right away and have the success we've seen him have in this league. So I'm holding out hope that that's what it is, because there isn't a better option to replace D'Amico Ryans and Vic Fangio. So hopefully, if that opportunity comes, the 49ers bust out the checkbook and they're not shy about adding some zeros to that paycheck for Vic.
Yeah, Texans, the rap sheet reported Texans and D'Amico meeting today, and that if everything goes well, they'll probably name him head coach at some point in the next day or two. The NFL, is the NFL going to reinstate their emergency third quarterback rule? I mean, that game yesterday was awful. I mean, could you imagine if that were the Super Bowl? They would lose their minds. Now, we know they only do things if it affects their pocketbooks, but look at the numbers. Just 11 NFL quarterbacks played all of their team's scheduled games this season. 9 of them were on playoff teams. 5 playoff teams saw significant snaps from their backups this season due to injury. 3 started in the playoffs with backups as starters. 1, of course, the 49ers made it to the conference championship. They used to have a rule, I believe, that if the 2 guys went down, a third guy could come in. They don't have that rule anymore. Most teams go with 2. I mean, there's people asking a couple questions today. They're asking, is the NFL going to introduce this rule? And also, what is it about the 49ers that their quarterbacks keep getting hurt? What do you think? Are we going to see this rule changed where, what happened yesterday essentially won't happen in the future?
They absolutely should. And there's no reason, in my opinion, not to have it. I don't think it provides any competitive advantage or disadvantage to any team. It makes complete sense to have it. The only people watching yesterday's game that were more upset than 49ers fans was the companies and entities that bought ad space in that second half of that game, because I can't imagine how many people just simply tuned out. And I'm sure plenty of 49ers and Eagles fans stayed watching the whole 60 minutes. They probably lost a huge chunk of just the casual nationwide audience because it was a team that couldn't throw the football forward. And the outcome was pretty much written on the wall a quarter into the game. So I think you're right, Larry. Like, when you have a situation like that, I think the outside factors that play in with money, with ad revenue, with all the things that are really powering this engine, they're going to have something to say about that. And I think that's a situation that you have to be able to avoid at all costs. And you have to be able, again, it doesn't guarantee that the 49ers win the game or even have a chance to win the game. But if you had an able-bodied quarterback that could step in, if Jacob Eason's in there after Josh Johnson gets hurt, the Niners, you at least have that glimmer of hope, and it's a watchable product. What we saw yesterday was as close to an unwatchable playoff game that I can ever remember in conference championship weekend in my lifetime. And I think that's something you have to avoid at all costs.
Why don't we talk about that for a second? The 49ers, with nobody noticing, just one day cut Jacob Eason, signed Josh Johnson, and then Josh Johnson was their third quarterback. And then he became their second quarterback. And they knew that Josh probably couldn't get the job done as their backup quarterback, but they stayed with him. Was that a cap thing? I mean, to me, if there is reason today to be critical of the 49ers and some of the moves that they made, but I think these moves that need to be criticized was the move to cut Jacob Eason and stay with Josh Johnson, who is a 36-year-old guy who is more of a third quarterback. He's a good guy. Everybody likes him, but if you had to play him with your job on the line, you would probably go get somebody else. And Eason has a huge arm and was in their system. And I talked to him about a week or two before he got cut. He was looking forward to learning this offense, and he's a big guy who in some ways could make the throws better than any of the other quarterbacks. That, to me, they blew that. If you want to be critical there.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's, depends where you lie on that, philosophy. Cause what I kept getting reminded of, Larry, is I don't know if you remember that quote that Tom Moore had. He was the offensive coordinator with Peyton Manning for a number of years in Indianapolis. Ron Jaworski and John Gruden were doing some research for, I think it was a book Ron Jaworski was writing. And at a practice, he asked Tom Moore, he's like, well, why aren't Peyton's backups getting any snaps? Like, don't you think would be beneficial for them to get some work? And he basically responded by saying, if 18 goes down, we're screwed, and we don't practice screwed. So I think there is some of that mentality within the NFL where these guys just feel like, hey, if we're on our fourth quarterback, we can't prepare for that. We can't practice for that. But I'm with you in the sense that you can at least give yourself a fighting chance. And maybe there was more value in having a guy that understood the playbook, that was able to help prepare Brock Purdy in that quarterback room. And that's might have been what they were looking at, because Josh Johnson is much more familiar with Kyle's offense, the plays he's going to be running, than a guy like Jacob Eason. But ultimately, this is where I think it comes back to having that emergency quarterback, because if you had been able to keep Eason and keep Josh Johnson and have that, third quarterback dressed on game day, I think you're able to avoid making those kind of decisions. But I also can kind of understand, at a certain point, it's an exercise in futility to expect the fifth quarterback down the line to be prepared to step into an NFC Championship game against a team as good as the Eagles.
John B said, here's a donation. Sad news for Brock, but 6 months is optimistic. More than likely, he'll need 6 to 9 months. Niners need to go all in on Trey Lance and see if he is our future quarterback. You seem to think that Trey Lance would be their number one option. Was that factoring in the Purdy injury? Because to me, Purdy was clearly better than Lance, even in camp, even in the preseason. Purdy was statistically the best quarterback in the NFL the last third of the season and just won 2 playoff games. So were you saying Lance would be the dream candidate because you were discounting Purdy because of the injury, or just actually you think Lance's upside is greater?
I was saying that because Purdy is going to be out for a while. I think had Brock Purdy not gotten hurt, regardless of what happened in the game yesterday, he would have been penciled in as quarterback 1, and it would have been his job to lose. I don't think he would have been guaranteed that job, but I think he definitely would have been the guy getting the reps with the ones, and it would have taken a special training camp performance from Trey Lance to unseat Purdy. But now that Purdy is obviously going to miss pretty much the entire offseason, that's what I'm saying. I just think that the best outcome for the 49ers would be to have Trey Lance be good and be the guy. I admittedly am not sold either way. I'm not saying I don't think he's going to be good, and I'm not saying that I think he's going to come in and be an MVP candidate. But given the capital they invested in him and given how cheap he is relative to getting a guy on the open market as a veteran free agent, that to me would be the best outcome right now. But I also think that the problem is far too often when we talk about quarterback play, right, what people always jump to is these big, strong athletes that have the big arms that can, extend plays with their legs. They can add some rushing ability, which is fantastic. But if you don't have the fundamentals down and you don't have accuracy, you don't have the ability to check pre-snap and make corrections at the line and diagnose coverage, which I'm not saying Trey Lance doesn't have. I'm just saying we haven't seen it yet. So it's still a great unknown. Whereas with Purdy, we saw it in the playoffs. We saw it in some high leverage games down the stretch. I think there was a more adequate sample size with Purdy where you'd feel confident in those areas that a quarterback has to have. And if I'm the 49ers, I need some sort of insurance if we go into next season, because you don't know for sure what you have with Trey Lance. And as much as his upside might be there, you can't bet on the ceiling. You have to have some kind of floor. And Trey Lance and some, day 3 draft picks or guys signed off the street is doing this roster an injustice given how talented they still will be next season.
I think if you're one of those guys that wants Tom Brady on the Niners, today's a great day for you, because I think, Tom is probably going to be done in Tampa, probably wants to keep playing. We know he wants to play for the Niners, and the Niners suddenly have like a short-term opening. You know what I mean? But if I'm Trey Lance and I'm his family, I'm his representative, I look at 2023 as the season Trey Lance needs to play. So I don't know that I like Tom Brady there, and I'm not sure if you could trade Lance or Purdy at this point because of the injuries. But that would be a spectacular room if somehow Purdy and Lance weren't 100% and still wanted to be here and weren't going to beg out and demand trades. If you had Tom Brady at number one quarterback and you've got two guys on the rookie deal sitting right there, kind of learning from the master. Heck, there'd be worse things that you could think of. One positive that I got to mention from yesterday's game, and I hate people who look for positives insanely, but by the way, this guy says Purdy came in with the team already hot. Credit to him. He has skills. Trey started with the team on a slow start that went 3-4 to begin, not even an even evaluation. I wasn't basing it on the games. I was basing it on the practices. You're right, though. Krueg, 6'1". We didn't get enough look at Trey in the games to make an evaluation. I just thought that Purdy looked better in the practices than Trey. The two guys, though, I got to shout out because I thought they were really good, and there was no reason for them to stop playing, and that was Charvarius Ward and Diamador Lenore. I thought those guys played well. You look at the numbers that Hurts had. He threw for only 121 yards. They targeted Brown and Devontae Smith, I think maybe the best pair of receivers in the game, outside of the guys the Niners have. I mean, those guys, they are probably better, actually, if you really want to be objective. But 6 targets, 2 catches allowed to those guys for 16 total yards, and the 1 pass breakup, against Ward and against Lenore. So obviously they had better numbers against other guys, but those 2 guys stood up, and actually Lenore, if there was one consistent positive in their secondary, Lenore seemed to get a little bit better all the way through the season.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. And I think that was an area of concern that I kept hearing from people as they were on that 12-game winning streak was, all right, well, our team's going to pick on the secondary. Are they going to pick on, the corner opposite of Mooney Ward? And I thought that Lenore answered the call. It was extremely impressive with the way that he closed out that year. And I think that the most unfortunate part of the way the game unfolded yesterday was I thought the Niners defense as a whole had a really good game plan for that Eagles offense. I thought the secondary played really well, as you just mentioned, and I thought that the edge rushers did a really good job of not getting too aggressive. There were a couple plays where Nick Bosa specifically kind of cut off the stem of his pass rush, made Jalen Hurts stay in the pocket, didn't really allow him to get to the outside. So all these points were, obviously emphasized leading up to the game, and I just think it's so unfortunate that it's not going to be reflected because the Eagles ended up with 31 points and it looks much worse on paper than what we saw in the actual game. And B, it ultimately didn't matter because the Niners were only able to come away with 1 touchdown. They didn't have an offense that could function for 3/4 of that game. So you're right, Larry. People don't really want to hear it after a game like that. But the reality is, there's a good chance that's your starting cornerback duo going into next season, depending on what happens with Emmanuel Moseley. Hopefully he has one of the quicker recoveries from ACLs that we've seen in recent years where his timetable would be around, training camp week 1 next year. But if that doesn't work out that way, or he, doesn't come back with the 49ers, I believe he's an unrestricted free agent, actually. Lenore could be the starting corner next year. And I think that having that confidence playing in those big games like that will do wonders carrying over into the offseason and into next year as well.
Okay. One area, I gotta be critical here. Mitchell Ness, by the way, says Niners D was scary good when Moseley was starting. Absolutely. They lost Moseley. They lost a true difference maker on the back end, and we'll see if he's coming back in free agency. But the 49ers built their defense on, now granted, they weren't going to win yesterday after Purdy went down. So this is all besides the point as far as I'm concerned, but it needs to be stated. The Niners' focus on defense has been the front. Everything they do, all their cap, all their picks, it's the front. pass rush. We're going wide 9. We're getting stars. We're signing guys. We're getting depth. The Niners generated 9 pressures and 1 sack. Nick Bosa had 3 of the pressures. Armstead had 2. Armstead had the 1 sack. Everybody else was pretty bad. Javon Kinlaw got abused. Javon Kinlaw I played one of the worst games I think I've seen him play. I mean, he just got kicked around, moved out of the hole. He's not DeForest Buckner. When you don't rush the passer and you get moved the way he got moved in the run game, there's a word for that. It's called backup, right? You're not a starter. You're a backup. And he's a backup that provides no pass rush. So you can bust. I mean, clearly he's a bust from a first-round draft choice. But the way he got moved yesterday, I haven't seen defensive tackles his size get moved like that ever. I mean, he had no anchor. He was just going flying left and right. I don't know what to say, but the one thing, this kind of reminds me of the Cowboys in 92, 93, the Niners against the Cowboys in 92, 93, where they just weren't good enough on the D-line. And then finally in 94, they said, you know what? Our guys inside are kind of, there ain't no more Fagan. There ain't no more Michael Carter. There ain't no more Pierce Holt. And the guys that we got are supposed to be good. They're high draft picks, but they ain't all that good. So we need somebody else. And they went and drafted Bryant Young and put him next to Stubblefield. And that was the teeth of their 94 defensive front. The 49ers don't have a lot of wholesale changes they need to make, but one of them is they need to go find a guy next to Armstead in the interior that's a whole lot better and a whole lot more stout and a whole lot faster than Javon Kinlaw. So Kinlaw he was the biggest loser from yesterday's game as far as winners and losers. The film from that game is atrocious. If I was Javon Kinlaw, I would hire people to break into the building and steal those films and bury them somewhere, because he got moved all day. Any way they wanted to move him, they moved him. There was one play where Armstead stands up a double team. They're both getting combo blocked. Armstead stands his up, and Kinlaw gets thrown like 5 yards out of the play. He's strong, but he's not functionally strong. He may test well as an athlete, but he's not functionally fast. So it doesn't matter if you can lift the whole gym. It doesn't matter if you look menacing coming off the bus. What matters is how you play. And his play strength is nowhere close to his actual strength. So that's the biggest hole in their defense. They have to sit Kinlaw, do something with Kinlaw. I don't know what, but they need to find themselves a tandem partner inside who can play on first and second down next to Armstead. That film yesterday was the worst film I think I've seen from Kinlaw the entire time. I'm not just waiting until the end of the year. That game was the worst I've seen him look. I don't know. He was on roller skates. He was just getting moved at will. Now, Givens gets moved from time to time. Kentavious is enormously strong. When he was here, he would still get moved in the run game. It's not about his strength. It's about his functional strength. It's about his anchor ability. And he does not anchor at all. He doesn't get anything done. The fact that they've had to Kinlaw has been so deficient that it's prevented Drake Jackson from getting on the field, because they've got to carry an extra tackle because they don't know what Javon is going to give them. So they're going with an extra tackle, and they're taking Drake and they're putting him in civvies. Drake needed to be out there. He needs to be out, but they need to get another defensive tackle, a starting tackle. They missed DJ Jones in the biggest of ways. But to me, I thought Kinlaw was abysmal. I haven't seen him look that bad since he's put on a Niner uniform.
I haven't had a chance to go through the defensive film yet, Larry. I'll do that later tonight. I have seen the clips that you've mentioned, and it was a little eye-opening because I understand that people's frustration with the lack of pass rush and the fact that the Niners traded Buckner and used that pick to take Kinlaw, and immediately from day one he had shoes to fill that realistically were going to be difficult for anybody to fill. But you can correct me if I'm wrong. I can't remember ever seeing him move like that in the run game, and that was an area where he may not have showed up in the stat sheet, but he was standing up double teams. He was a guy that was affecting these short yardage situations. I can remember back in that Commanders game, he had a couple of stops on that goal line stand they had where him getting into his gap and eating up a couple combo blocks was the difference between the Commanders scoring a touchdown and turning the ball over. So it was very eye-opening to me to see it, because I think we're at a point where, the expectations have to be tempered, and, you're probably not going to see the results that you expected from day one when the Niners took him with a 13th overall pick. And you're like, okay, well, look at this guy. He's 6'5", 330, moves like this, and he's going to slot in. We're going to have him play 3-tech, replace Buckner, and do all these things that, we kind of envisioned from day one. But I also think a lot of it comes down to it was clear that they had this athlete with all these, all this potential, right? And that this guy that tested off the charts. And I feel like we always talk about quarterbacks, how quarterbacks take time to develop, and oftentimes that gets overlooked with other players. And I think with Javon Kinlaw, the biggest detriment to the first 3 years of his career has been that he hasn't had the full season to develop and the time to get that pad level corrected and get that functional strength you're mentioning, honed in at the NFL level, because he just unfortunately has had a string of injuries that have prevented that from being the case. So, I don't think the 49ers are going to get rid of him. I think he's a guy that still holds a lot of value for them, given what we've seen him be able to do and given what his cap number will be for the next year. But I think that the loss of DJ Jones, as you mentioned, was something that was extremely, extremely underrated last offseason. And it was something that I got a ton of pushback for when I was like, this is the biggest priority for the 49ers this offseason. Get DJ Jones back. Find any way possible to get DJ Jones back, because DJ Jones was this guy. I have never seen a guy that size at 6 foot, 300 pounds, that literally would put guys on roller skates on the interior of offensive lines. And I think that was something that ultimately hurt them, obviously, down the stretch, that didn't really get the airplay or the time that it deserved last offseason. And maybe the saving grace going into next year is that they have a guy in Khalil Davis that they feel is very similar to DJ Jones, has a very similar physical profile, and maybe can do some of those things where you get back into a rotation of Kinlaw and a guy like Khalil Davis who maybe gives you some of the same things. But the main takeaway I had from it, Larry, is just that it seemed like you said, like the worst we've seen at the worst possible time. And it wasn't something that had been there all year. If this had been a problem all year, I don't think it would be as much of a concern. But the fact that it reared its head in a game like that is where I'm kind of like, it makes it feel a lot more brutal than it would have been otherwise.
Yeah, it was a tough watch. I mean, the Eagles have a great offensive line, and Kelsey's going to Canton. But man, if you watched Armstead, he stayed in there. He held his ground. If you watch Kinlaw, he just got moved. The Niner defense, by the way, held the Eagles to 1.9 yards per carry after contact. So that's pretty good. The Niners runners averaged 3.3 yards per carry after contact. So they did a good job after initial contact. But what I'm talking about is the kind of the reset of the line of scrimmage. And there were several plays where, Kinlaw was just uprooted out of the hole. And I don't always agree with Pro Football Focus. I think sometimes they get it right. Sometimes, they get it wrong. But Kinlaw, they gave him a 29.1 grade. And for the postseason, for the game, and for the 3 postseason games, they gave him a 29.4 grade, the lowest of any 49er defensive player. So, I just don't. I don't see him getting a lot done. You know what I mean? He's out there. He looks menacing, but I just don't see him getting a lot done. He doesn't make a lot of tackles against the run. He sure as heck doesn't rush the passer. So, he's enormously strong. But if you're going to be uprooted the way he was uprooted in this game, it's like, I gotta I got to look for somebody else. I mean, I absolutely got to look for somebody else if I'm John Lynch. Glass City says, I just tuned in. If you're talking about a revamp of the D line, then I'm 100% with you. God, we were always 1-2 guys short of being an elite D line. Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about, is that they put everything into their D line, and Bosa's a star, and Armstead is still going strong. He's functionally very strong. Ebukam is a really good player, but he was dinged up as the year went on. Menahue had problems off the field. Maybe his head wasn't there. Willis is coming on as an edge player. Drake Jackson's a good edge player. And then you have T.Y. McGill, who's not very stout, but really quick. And Givens, who's also similar. They're gap shooters. They're penetrators. They're not two gap, hold up the line. And then Hyder's certainly not that player. He's like a kind of a combo DN D tackle. So they had to play Kinlaw. Once Ridgeway went down, they had no other body who could play that spot. They needed Javon to stay healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, sorry.
There we go. They have a great D line, but they definitely need to invest in more on that defensive line.
I'm 100% with you, and I think it's there you can find the value, guys, because Chris Kocurek and Daryl Tapp are so good at what they do, and obviously having the talent around them is going to create more favorable matchups. We've seen guys like Arden Key come in, Ameni who came in, Jordan Willis has come in and have success. But I'm with you, like obviously the tenure didn't go the way that anybody would have liked it to ultimately, but like the impact D Ford had immediately in 2019 and what he brought as that elite speed rusher opposite Bosa really unlocked the power and potential of that defensive front, especially when they got in that wide nine. And there are some guys this year that will be free agents that I think they should take a strong look at. I've been a big fan of Yannick Ngakoue, who was with the Colts last season, was with the Jags for a number of years.
Maryland,
he's a guy who fits that speed rusher profile, really violent hands, has an incredible cross chop move that he uses. Another guy who I really liked coming out UTSA a couple years ago, Marcus Davenport, who's been with the Saints. Another guy who has this massive, like 6'6", 275, a ton of tools for a guy like Kocurek to work with. And, like even a guy like, we saw the Ravens this past year. They brought in Justin Houston, who's 34 years old, who had, been a great player, all pro level player that kind of was on the downslope of his career. And he was tremendous for them this year because he's a heady player who's been around and was able to take advantage of those matchups they got him in. So even if they don't sign the guy who's in their prime, who is this all pro perennial, Pro Bowl level talent, I think just getting some veterans who are proven at that position opposite Bosa would do them well. And there's so many options this offseason that there really isn't an excuse for them to not supplement and revamp that room, particularly when you consider a guy like Menahue and a guy like Willis are probably on the way out given their impending, free agency coming up. And there's just not money to bring back everybody. You can't keep the whole band together. That's where I'd like to see them make some changes as well.
I'll tell you the other guy that I really love in the draft, and I don't know if they'll, the Niners don't have any high picks, but Isaiah Foskey from Notre Dame, who's, I think he went to De La Salle. He's like 6'5", 260, and he just plays enormously strong, and he's just a terrific pass rusher. I love Isaiah Foskey, and it's a good defensive end draft. I mean, there's going to be a day 3 edge rushers. The San Jose State kid, Fehoko, is worth watching. Rhett Hall, the former Niner, his son, Cade Hall, is, got tremendous motor, 6'3", 270 from San Jose State. Really like Cade Hall quite a bit. There's a lot of good ones. Tyrus Wheat from Mississippi State is a really underrated player, 260-pound edge rusher who can fly off the edge. So, I mean, there's going to be guys in this draft. It's just, but they need to keep injecting their defensive line. Who would you say is the free agent? I've got a list here of their free agents. They've got a number of free agents this year. Restricted wise, Kevin Givens, Flanagan Fowles, Colton McKivitz, Jawan Jennings. Those are the restricted guys. And they're, Matt Mayoko is suggesting that maybe they'll let Mike McGlinchey go and make Colton McKivitz the starting right tackle. That's kind of interesting. I saw that today. But unrestricted wise, listen to this list of unrestricted free agents. Garoppolo, okay, you probably could let him go. Samson Ebukam, you want to retain him. Emmanuel Mosley, I think you want to retain him. McGlinchey probably leaves. Aziz Al-Shaair probably leaves, but I think you'd want to retain him. Robbie Gould, Daniel Brunskill, Debo, they got signed. Ridgeway, Kerry Hyder, Jordan Willis. Who else? There's some other guys who are down the list. Mitch Drake, they got Greenlaw, I think, signed. Amenahue, Jimmy Ward. Who's the priority free agency wise for you? Who's the guy that you absolutely got to see coming back?
To me, it's Jimmy Ward, and unfortunately, given the tone of his interview in the locker room, it sounds like that maybe isn't going to be the case. I just think he's a guy that gives you so much versatility on the back end. He was, in my opinion, for his money, the best coverage safety in the NFL. When you leave him man-to-man, you isolate him on one player, whether it's a slot receiver, tight end, guy coming out of the backfield. In man coverage, there's nobody that I watch consistently that I think is better than Jimmy Ward. He also was obviously, the nickel corner for a lot of this year, and he was able to fill that huge hole they had once Mosley went down and Lenore kicked outside. So to me, it's Jimmy Ward, and not only just what he does in coverage, but his ability to defend the run and the ability that the 49ers have to match teams in 11 personnel. That's something that's, kind of taken the league by storm. These 3 wide receiver sets. Well, the 49ers can match that with a guy like Ward in the slot and then still defend the run at a really high rate. And I think that that's something that's so valuable these days, being able to match personnel without bending to what the offense is wanting you to do. And that's one of the reasons why the 49ers have been so successful the last couple of years, is they've done a really good job generating those mismatches. And Jimmy Ward is a guy that really makes it, you end up becoming matchup proof because of the amount of ways you can use him on the in the defensive secondary. So that would be number 1 for me.
Yeah, I love Jimmy Ward as well. I think if you went to Jimmy Ward early on, you might be able to get him at a pretty good value. And I think he would love to stay a Niner. I mean, he seems like a guy who has wanted to be a Niner. He loves being there. The coaches love him. So, they trust Jimmy Ward, and they love how his physicality, and they love how he shows up and plays hard. And, some guys are out there for the check. Some guys are out there for the glory. Some guys are out there because they're just bad A's who love to, hit and run and play. And that's kind of Jimmy, man. And if you can get a bunch of guys out there who are just, that just are badasses who can fly around and, play with reckless abandon, I think I want more of those guys. Now, I did hear some of what Jimmy said in the locker room, but Dante Whitner, who I do know and like and trust, says Jimmy Ward is selfish. If I was his teammate, I would never speak to him again. Did you hear anything in what he said in the post game that would make you have that strong of a take, Jordan? Or I guess maybe I should ask you, did you see what Jimmy said? Is there anything that you could share with us that he said that you thought crossed a line?
I searched for it and I couldn't find specifically, because I was shocked when I saw Whitner had said that. From what I was able to gather, it sounded like he said something where he talked about his individual performance and he thought he played well, which in my eyes, he did. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, especially for a guy going into, free agency and entering a period where it's probably going to be the last substantial payday or multi-year deal. He's, I think he's 32, or he will be 32 next season, if I remember correctly. I apologize if that's not accurate. I really don't see anything, or I didn't see anything that made me feel that way. And, Jimmy's the kind of guy that is not shy about being upfront and, sharing how he feels. I had the chance to speak with him in the locker room after the Dallas game, and he was very upfront with how he felt about the performance, how the game went, Dallas's offense. So I just think that's kind of who he is as a person from the little experience I've had getting the chance to speak with him. I did not see anything that was so egregious that would make me feel like I would never want to talk to him again if he was my teammate. So I'd be really interested if anybody else maybe in the chat saw it. I looked for it, couldn't find it, Larry.
Yeah, I didn't. I heard him saying, first of all, you have to understand. Dante understands players, and maybe Dante is expecting more, but every guy's wired a little differently. As for every player's wired a little differently. Some are fueled by money. Some are fueled by insecurity. Some are fueled by fame. Some are fueled by, I mean, you never know what fuels a player. And some guys have to think like that they're like, you know, like they're the guy. I mean, and what I would call almost, I would describe it as like extreme alphaism. Okay. Like you're so much the guy in every room that you're in that you kind of have this almost like barrier of, I'm not saying they can't be accountable, but maybe they're not verbally always accountable. And I think that's all we're talking about. I think Dante and Jimmy are very much similar guys. They're the kinds of guys that fly around, play with reckless abandon, hit like trucks, run like the wind. Football's important to them, winning's important to them. But when the game's over, some guys become reflective immediately and can talk about it. I think Dante was great at that, which is why he's so good at what he's doing now. Because he was my go-to guy, him and Boone, because they were very analytical and calm and measured and well-reasoned immediately in the aftermath of just playing, which I always thought was amazing and a stark contrast to some of the other locker room banter that you typically get. So I would run to Whitner, run to Boone. Jimmy is the kind of guy where he's a dominant guy. He's a leader. He likes to hit. He likes to be physical. And maybe he hasn't turned it off and he's still competing, sometimes in the post game. And I get that vibe from him. Like, hey man, I'm still competing and I'm still cagey. And so I don't put a lot of credence in it. Now, if he jumped up and down and said, you guys all suck and you're the reason we lost and I'm the best, anything along the lines of pointing fingers. But it's, to me, if you point at other people and say it's their fault, you're a loser and you got to get out of my room. But if you're a guy who just can't necessarily in the aftermath point the finger at yourself, or you have to kind of put up this, hey man, I played well, to make yourself feel fine, I got a little bit more wide berth for those kinds of personalities. I know these are nuances of locker room culture, but I'm just saying, I've been in there. I've talked to a lot of different guys. Jimmy Ward's a team guy, and he's beloved by the coaches and his teammates. I think his post-game confidence, if you will, may have gotten kind of confused with, I'm separating myself from my teammates, or I'm telling you I was great and I'm not the reason we lost. Either way, I'm okay with it. And, if Dante was here, I'd love to hear why he isn't okay with it. But to me, I think there's different guys have different personalities and can deal with failure differently. Dante might reach out and say, no, hell no, you don't talk about how good you played. And I basically agree with Dante, but I also kind of understand that some guys have a certain kind of facade or barrier that they put up that they don't let people behind even after the game. Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh, 100%. And I also think too that obviously media has a job to do, and everybody has a job to do. They're professionals. It's part of the process of being an NFL player and the NFL product. You're going to have people asking you questions after a tough game like that. But I think oftentimes there, and you've been there and you've experienced it countless times, like when you're in there in that moment after, basically playing in a game where you put your body on the line, your heart on the line, you've invested all this time, this entire process leading up, the whole year of work leading up to this game, you have to deal with the emotion of the fact that you played pretty well, your defense played pretty well, and you never had a fighting chance in that game. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with pointing out hey, we lost 31-7, but we all know why, and I think that that's kind of what it felt like from what I saw, where it was like, hey, I played pretty well. And again, I thought the most egregious thing that maybe somebody could point to with Jimmy Ward was that pass interference that extended that drive. And I think it was a terrible call. I think it was super ticky-tack. I thought it was something that you don't throw a flag for in the postseason. So I think the how charged those moments are too gets overlooked, and the raw emotion that these guys are working through after feeling like they had the rug pulled out from underneath them is also something to, kind of account for. And I agree with you. It's much easier to keep that confidence and keep that air of confidence you have going rather than just, sitting there and being like, hey, what do you want me to say? Like, our season got stolen from us by an unfortunate injury. And I don't blame players for kind of pumping themselves up in that moment.
This is in the chat. I just put this in there myself. This is the Niners picks, right, for the draft. They've got right now, it looks like on paper. Now, it may change if D'Amico goes and they get an extra third round compensatory pick. But right now, it looks like they already have 3 compensatory third round picks, 2 fifth round picks, one coming from the Dolphins. Or I should say 3 fifth round picks, one from the Dolphins and one compensatory. So no picks in the first round, no picks in the second round, no picks in the fourth round, but 3 third round picks and maybe a 4th third round pick coming their way if D'Amico goes to the Texans. And then 3 fifth round picks, a 6th round pick compensatory, and then 3 7th round picks. And they may even get an additional 7th round pick as well. So that's a lot of picks. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's 10 picks with the possibility of 11 picks. What's the priority? You've seen this team. What's the priority? Not knowing who's obviously you got to know who's leaving in free agency. And I already kind of went through threw out the list of free agents. To me, it's the big ones that I'd like back are Ebukam, Emmanuel Mosley, Aziz Al-Shair, Robbie Gold. After that, Jordan Willis. Other than that, they already got Greenlaw signed, Amenahue and Jimmy Ward. Those are the guys that I would try to bring back. I don't know if they can bring any of them back or all of them back or what group of them. But as far as the draft in April, obviously there's, one of the All-Star games was this weekend. I haven't looked at it yet, so I haven't really gotten into that whole aspect of the offseason. But just looking at the team and how they played, Jordan, what do you think? Where do you think this team needs to inject talent? What part of the field?
100% the safety spot opposite of Hufanga. I think that Hufanga has shown that he's somebody who can be a starting safety in the league. Obviously, I mean, he's an all-pro this year. I do think that there was a bit of growing pains towards the end of the year, but he's established himself as a starter on this team, and he'll be on year 3 of a rookie deal. But you look at Gibson, you look at Ward, those are guys that are on the other side of 30 that are both pending free agents. I think they do need to inject some youth into that position and start revamping the back end of that secondary. And I think that you can find a guy who could be a quality starter with one of those compensatory third-round picks. So I'm absolutely looking there. I also would like to see them add a little bit more talent at the receiver position. And I know it sounds silly with, Ayuk and Debo and Jennings and some of these guys, but it feels like that's a position you can never have too many guys. And I think when you're getting to the point the 49ers are at in this draft, you can't draft based solely on need when you're waiting that long to have your first pick and you're picking in the 3rd, 5th, 6th, 7th. You need to really just go best player available and start looking 2-3 years down the line at where you're potentially going to be at. So I think receiver is a position you can never have too many guys. I feel the same way about corners. Edge, like I think that Drake Jackson's a guy who has a great opportunity to slot in as the starting edge rusher opposite Nick Bosa next year. My thing with him all along was that it looked like he needed to add a little bit of weight, and it looked like something where, hey, a year in an NFL weight room is going to get him to where he needs to be. And I think if they can keep finding guys like that have that natural bend and that natural twitch off the edge, just keep stockpiling those. But whatever they do, don't get caught in a position where you're trying to fill needs in the 5th round, 6th round of a draft, especially if it's an immediate need. Just take the best player available and figure it out later, and then regroup next year when you have your draft picks back and you're actually picking on day 1 and early on day 2.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot that has to happen. People are asking me, hey, who should they look at in the Senior Bowl, at the Senior Bowl rosters? I've had to look at the Senior Bowl rosters and kind of study them. And I'll be watching all that stuff and taking a look in the days ahead. As I told you, I love Isaiah Foskey. And there's a bunch of guys. Tavius Robinson from Ole Miss from Oklahoma, I should say, is a nice player. I mean, there's a bunch of players that I really like in this upcoming draft. I'll do a whole Ali Gay from LSU is not a bad player at all. I really like him. Derek Hall from Auburn. Really like Derek Hall. So there's a lot of time between now and the draft. We'll get into a lot of those guys. Do you think Shanahan is going to lose anybody off his staff outside of D'Amico? Because I
Yeah,
saw LaFleur is the OC now in LA with the Rams.
I think that there's a really good chance that Bobby Slowick ends up going with D'Amico Ryans. He's somebody that I believe his title is passing game coordinator this past year, but he's somebody that's had a big impact on that offense, especially since LaFleur has been with Saleh in New York. So Slowick is a guy I could definitely see going. Anthony Lynn is a guy where I know he interviewed for Washington's offensive coordinator spot, or he was scheduled to. Um, I was shocked the 49ers were able to get him in the capacity he was in last season, given his resume and his experience in the league. So maybe they can work out a way to kind of increase pay or give him something, because I believe he had it was running backs coach and assistant coach this past season. But he's a guy where maybe the opportunity to call plays again is more appealing to him, and he's somebody who I think is going to be sought after. So those would be the two names that I would keep an eye on the most. But I think a lot of these guys, like the Bobby Turners and Johnny Hollands and the guys who've been around, I would expect them to, remain in the roles they're in with the 49ers. And hopefully they do, because I think, Larry, what often gets overlooked is the work that positional coaches are doing with these guys every day. We always talk about the head coach. Now the head coach is responsible for everything, and we often overlook the head coach is also responsible for assembling the staff beneath him and creating this hierarchy and creating these, relationships that these coaches and players have at the positional level. So you look at a guy like Brian Greasy, for all intents and purposes, Brian Greasy had a great first year with the 49ers. It looked like every quarterback that came in was prepared and had a solid game prep leading up to each game. You have a guy like Purdy who comes in as a 7th round rookie and was able to stay poised. And I think a lot of that does have to do with the work that's being done at the positional level. So hopefully they can keep most of the band together, but Bobby Slowick and Anthony Lynn would be the two guys that I would keep an eye on.
Yeah, Anthony Lynn, I would be very popular in NFL circles. Glass City makes a donation. He says, Larry, do you think they should use these picks and trade up or down to get those few special difference makers, or just draft as many people as possible and compete it out? It really depends on what their numbers look like after they go through the free agents they want to pursue on other teams and the free agents they want to pursue on their own team, or re-sign, I should say. And that will get done in March. And maybe leading into March, they'll re-sign some guys, maybe even possibly before free agency. But then you get the draft in April. The one thing with the 49ers is that they took this year, and that's what's so great about where they're at as an organization right now. This team made it to the NFC Championship game. They have a huge core of about 20 guys, and about 12 of them are future starters who they just developed this year, who I think are going to be starters. And that list includes Brock Purdy, Trey Lance, Elijah Mitchell, J.P. Mason, Davis Price, Danny Gray. A couple guys like Aaron Banks and Burford are already starting on the offensive line, but Zakel, they think, is a starter. They really like Poe, Drake Jackson, Hufanga. And these are all brand new players, guys that they just got. Lenore, Womack. They love Marcelino, McCrary Ball, Kalia Davis, Tay Martin. I mean, there's a lot. There's maybe a dozen. There might be 15 guys right there that they brought into the organization. They've been developing them this year, and now they'll go right into their offseason program. And I think there's a lot of guys on that list that are players. There may be a dud somewhere on that list, but it ain't more than one or two. There's a lot of really, I think, good developmental players. So I think they're relatively deep. Where do they need help? Well, definitely it's the offensive line, and maybe they need to take another quarterback. And I would say you always are looking for like a day 3 running back, just because you need running backs. But then on offense, that's it. I shouldn't say that. Like if somehow they could get a high pick for a Trey Lance and they could wind up with a Michael Mayer or a top tier tight end, because I think you saw in yesterday's game that Kittle's a 1, but the rest of the guys in the tight end room I think are 3s. They're not 2s, they're 3s, and they might be 4s. So I think they could use a second tight end or another number 1 tight end. That would be a need. But yeah, running back, another tight end, offensive line on offense. On defense, they got to replace Kinlaw. They have to get a two-gap strong guy who can move the pocket. They need their Chris Jones. They need somebody. Armstead's long in the tooth. This is the biggest need. They need that foundation piece tackle inside. They're great at linebacker, especially if they can re-sign Aziz. I agree with Jordan. They could use a young player at safety who could really hit and run and cover. And then, of course, they either need to bring back Mosley, probably, and add, a long, trustworthy corner that they can add to their mix. So, I mean, it's a lot of needs, but there's a lot of other teams that have a lot more needs. So I think they're probably sitting in a good spot. Jordan, we got this one too from Glory. Says, have you mentioned potential O-line free agents? I know there's Caleb McGarry, who played at UW and played for the Atlanta Falcons. He's kind of short arm tackle, but if they wanted to replace McGlinchey in free agency with a top tier veteran, that's the big questions are going to be right tackle if McGlinchey goes, and then defensive tackle, because we know how much credence they put in that position. I think those offensive tackle and defensive tackle would be my guess, would be at the top of their list. The way they see football defensively is from the front to the back. So they'll always prioritize their line needs over their back end needs. So I see offensive tackle somehow being an issue if they don't go after. I mean, a veteran like McGarry would prevent them from needing a tackle in the draft. But I'm looking at O tackle, D tackle. Jordan, what do you think?
I would say if looking at potential fits for offensive linemen, like they have to be able to move in space and they have to be able to operate in this, ever evolving Shanahan scheme that was very, heavily predicated on that outside zone, but we're seeing a lot more gap runs the last year or two. A guy who I think would be an absolutely great fit, who shouldn't cost too much if they're not able to bring back McGlinchey, would be Billy Turner, who just spent the last year with the Denver Broncos. He's a guy who I think is a solid veteran, would seamlessly fit in. Somebody that you could count on, who has, a slight familiarity with the scheme during his time with the Packers, and he's somebody who I really like. I'm going through the list here. Like, there's not a ton of guys that really jump out where I'm like, blown away by what they've done or the potential they could have. One guy that kind of does stand out, I liked Andre Dillard a lot coming out, if I recall correctly. He was a Washington State guy. And he's a guy where, Philly, they're stacked on the offensive line. I'd be shocked if they spend money to bring him back. I don't know necessarily that it would be an upgrade right away, but I think he's a serviceable tackle who could slot in there. So those would be the two guys I would watch. I think that point you made about the Mayoko, talking about McGlinchey is very telling, because I think McGlinchey's going to get paid a lot more than 49ers fans expect, Larry. I think that he's a guy that might price himself out of the 49ers budget. And when you think about the fact that a third of the league is running some kind of variation of Shanahan, McVay, that kind of coaching trees offense, McGlinchey's a guy who fits a lot of teams' needs right now. So I think that their best bet would be to have a veteran who could step in right away. And, Colton McKivitz does fit that mold. He is a veteran who's familiar with the system. And I think that, he was the guy that he was the gold helmet guy coming out. They loved him and his potential. So I don't think that they will let McGlinchey walk unless they feel confident in their contingency plan. And I expect that to be a veteran like a Billy Turner, or McKivitz just slides right into there.
Yeah. I mean, they have Jalen Moore still there. I know they think of Nick Zakel as a starter, so maybe Zakel slides in at right guard. Spencer Burford played right tackle his final year at UTSA. Burford would need a jump rope and some quickness. He'd have to quicken those feet between now and camp if he was going to play right tackle in the NFL. But he's 6'4", 300-pounder. Very athletic kid, but he's kind of built more like a guard than an offensive tackle. He could probably play right tackle though. And he's not that much. It's not like McGlinchey's that much quicker, but he's quicker. So I don't know. It's, the offensive line for sure is going to be a major need. Defensive tackle, and then, you can always use more help in the secondary. The guy who was kind of disappointing to me this year, because I kind of thought at the end of last year that he had broken through, had gotten to a new level, and he was still on the team, but he just didn't do anything, was Ambry Thomas. Very odd player. I mean, at the end of last year, he was playing with a lot of confidence. This year, his sophomore year, in the NFL, he just regressed. I mean, he regressed significantly. I was surprised. I thought he was going to continue to emerge, and it just didn't happen for him this year for whatever reason.
Yeah, that was a really tough evaluation because I remember when the Niners had drafted him, the game that I kept coming back to was Michigan played Notre Dame in, I think it was 2019. And he was matched up pretty much one-on-one with Chase Claypool the whole game. And, you got a guy going against a proven NFL receiver, and he looked very good against Claypool in that game. He had great traits. He had good speed. He had good closing speed, even when it looked like the receiver had a step. So I wonder where the disconnect is, because I don't think it's a lack of traits or a lack of athleticism. I'd argue he might be the best athlete in that cornerback room, given what
I think you're right.
Yeah, so hopefully that's something that can correct itself. It's not the same trajectory at all, but I do remember early on with a guy like Emmanuel Mosley or a guy even like a Kella Witherspoon, where there was a little bit of disconnect there and they maybe weren't getting the playing time. And then year 2, year 3, they did come around and end up being, a big contributor to the team. So I think there still is a path for him because he has that athleticism. Like, if you can move the way he can move, I think that there's always going to be teams willing to take a chance that they can coach you up and they can get the best out of you. But I'm with you 100% because I would love to know where there is that disconnect in this guy who's this tremendous athlete, but he's not able to get on the field. And we're seeing other guys who don't have that same athleticism being slotted above him on the depth chart repeatedly. So I completely agree with you on that, Larry.
One of the guys that keeps getting mentioned in the chat, now we get a super chat for it. LZ makes a donation. He says, trade for Joey Bosa, trade package ideas. And we saw Joey Bosa wearing the Niner. Did you see the video of the Eagle fans talking trash to Joey Bosa? Is there anything lamer than talking trash to somebody who could easily kick your ass, but just isn't going to kick your ass because it's all on camera? I mean, it's like, is there anything weaker than talking trash to a professional athlete while you're filming him? I mean, I saw that and I'm thinking to myself, I just wish, there'd be some judge in the land that would just say, you know what? I'm going to set a new precedent. If you're some trash talking idiot and you're just sitting there talking trash to a guy who could easily kick your ass, you deserve to get your ass kicked. And I would have loved to have seen it. Of course, you're not going to see it because Joey's going to get sued and everybody's going to get sued and it's all on camera. And he did the right thing. But it's like so weak. It was cool to see him supporting his brother, but it was typical on brand for Eagle fans to heckle him the way they did.
Yeah, and I agree with you completely. That's the stance I've always had. Like, you should never say anything to an athlete that you wouldn't otherwise say if you just happened to pass them by on the sidewalk and they were some regular person that wasn't restrained by the fact that they'd throw their career away if they acted on the urge to want to pummel you, which I'm sure Joey Bosa had and plenty of athletes do have. I will say, though, if you're Joey Bosa in that situation, like when I watch that, I'm like, man, there's nothing good that comes from engaging with this. Like, you got to just, as unfortunate as it is and as annoying as it is, knowing that you probably could pummel the people heckling you, you got to just let it go, because all it does is it further feeds into them, heckling you even more and thinking they're getting into your head. But yeah, I agree with you. Like, I think it's super lame. And I just think that it goes beyond the whole, like, I know Philadelphia, that's kind of their identity. It's a tough place to come in. It's a tough place to play. But when, it's Bush League talking crap to somebody that can't deck you back, right? And that to me is always something that I will never be able to get behind. And I think that's totally different from the competitive, we're going to boo you and make it tough for you to play here. When you're taking shots at somebody outside in the parking lot knowing that they full well can't do anything to you, it's cowardly is the way I would describe it. I think it's very cowardly, and I can't get behind it. But I also think Bosa needs to know better and just not engage in it.
Exactly. Tim Ryan said MF says Tim Ryan said he flipped some Eagle fans off. Well, did you see the video from the stands as the Niners were coming off the field and you had like hundreds of people double birding them?
I did see that. And I honestly, it's a bold move to, heckle Tim Ryan. Tim Ryan's still a big dude. He's not.
Yeah.
You see him coming with the big shades and the hair slip. Yeah, that's not somebody that I would want to be. I would want to be,
no,
giving the bird to.
You don't want any part of Tim Ryan. I just think that I don't understand why we treat these fans that are basically classless losers, and we treat them like they're charming. They're not charming. It's not, there's nothing charming about a bunch of drunken fools flipping birds and saying, that's not charming. We make it seem, why is it that we make it seem with like Eagles fans like it's somehow, oh yeah, but they're great fans. They're terrific fans. Yeah, are they flipping off people and throwing ice chunks when there's ice in the stands and committing assault and showing tasteless and low grade behavior consistently for 3.5 hours? Yeah, but you know what? They're great fans, man. They're great fans. They love their team. No, they're trash. They're idiots. I mean, I don't care if it's Eagles fans. I'm not talking specifically about Eagles fans, but just anybody who goes to a sporting event. You're not on the team. All right? You're not part of. Yes, there's violence involved in the game, but you're not part of that violence. And the players aren't endorsing you kicking ass, wearing their colors. And it's just, I don't know, it's just, there's this like subculture of we're just going to act like total fools. And like, because it's lots of people in mass, we kind of like, hey, it's charming. It's look how much they care. It's not charming. It's low grade, and it damages the brand, in my opinion. I don't really care at the end of the day. Swear all you want, say what you want, but like the vile crap that you hear, people vomiting, forcing themselves to vomit on people, that are around them, and brawls breaking out left and right with children there, women getting hit. I mean, it's so low grade on so many levels that it's like I watch that and I'm thinking to myself, there's zero charm to this. We should not in any way make it seem like has some charm to it. It has no charm.
Yeah, I get that. And I think there's a line, right? Like, I think obviously anytime you physically are, assaulting somebody, throwing beer at them, doing stuff like that, that is completely classless. There's no room for that. And it's abhorrent behavior, right? But I'm not going to lie, I kind of like the whole, like, the boo birds and the flipping people off and the like walk in, as long as it's just vocal and as long as you aren't doing it, to people walking with their family when there's women and children around, like have some sort of decorum. But hey, if I'm 27, if I'm walking into a stadium with a group of my friends in my mid-20s that are all guys walking in and somebody's flipping us off and heckling us a little bit, I'm not gonna lie, it kind of adds to it a little bit. I remember I went to Seattle for that game in 2019. They won in week 17, and it was kind of it was a more friendly atmosphere obviously than Philadelphia was. But I remembered all the crap that I got in on the way out, and it gave me the most smug smile on my face walking out after the Niners had won. It fueled my elation even more so. So I think as long as it's done with just basic human decency, I'm all for it. But I agree, there's a line that clearly gets crossed, and it's just come to a point where it's like, that's the identity. Like, oh, it's Eagles fans. What are they going to do? And like, I have a lot of friends who are great Eagles fans, who are very passionate, who are very respectful. And I don't want to generalize an entire fan base, because I can remember plenty of things I saw growing up at Candlestick that I could describe as classless, that, I'm sure plenty of other 49ers fans watching would agree. But it is funny to me that, because I think the thing that's lost, Larry, is that like right now the Eagles are good. So all that hatred and vitriol is pointed towards the other team and the other fans. When the Eagles suck, like that gets pointed inward and they're booing their own team. Like that city booed Santa Claus. So, I mean, nobody is safe from this. And that to me is where, again, when it's respectful, I have a little bit of I don't say admiration is the right word, but like they're very consistent with it, right? So for the guys that are doing it, or the people that are there doing it in a way that's not completely just, classless and just beyond human decency, shout out to you. I do think that it gets overlooked and overshadowed because of the people that are doing all the disgusting things you mentioned.
Well, I mean, I'm for a rivalry. Like I heard the Niner bus got hit with eggs. That's funny.
Yeah,
I mean,
stuff like that.
If you throw eggs at the Niner bus, that's funny.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm on the bus, I'm laughing. That's funny. Nobody gets hurt. Everybody sees how you feel. You know what I'm saying. Two last ones. Who wins the Super Bowl?
This is so tough, Larry. I'm still kind of going back and forth. I want to say the Eagles just because of how strong they are on the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. I just think that still is what wins football games, no matter how transcendent a quarterback talent is. It's really hard to win when the other team has an advantage on the defensive and offensive line. But Patrick Mahomes is entering, or if not already entered, that kind of like, remember the don't bet against Tom Brady, never bet against Tom Brady was always the saying the last 20 years. Mahomes is already making me feel like no matter how much on paper I can rationalize it, it seems stupid to bet against him. So I'm leaning Eagles right now because of the favorable matchup I think they have up front on both sides of the ball. But I probably will ultimately get swayed back to the Chiefs just because Patrick Mahomes is an alien and probably the first NFL player that I've ever seen in my lifetime. And I'm only 27 for, what it's worth, where they've been in the league for 5 seasons. They could retire tomorrow and they're a first ballot Hall of Famer. So he's a guy that I don't think I can bring myself to bet against. But as of now, I'm slightly leaning Eagles.
I'm leaning Chiefs. I think Kansas City gets it done. I think they're the better team. I'm a little concerned about how healthy they are. MF says, my view seems like KC is better. I think KC's better as well. But we'll see. We'll see. Hey, last one. And this is kind of a tough one. And any answer you give me, I'll just take. It's somewhat subjective. But has this been a successful season? I mean, they were there last year, and they're a franchise that judges themselves on Lombardi trophies, and they still haven't gotten this Lombardi trophy. And I don't know if they're closer to it or not. They lost another championship game, but it is also, you're going to be awfully miserable if you go through life only happy with the ultimate prize. You know what I'm saying? So successful year, not successful year. So that's a tough one. Where are you on that one?
So last night I brought up a tweet I had before the week 1 game in Chicago. And my view was if the 49ers won at least 10 games and they won 1 playoff game, it would be a successful season. And that was going into it under the lens of it would be Trey Lance's, job all year. He'd be a developing quarterback. I thought Super Bowl year 1 was unrealistic. And then, when Jimmy came in, I kind of maintained the same outlook because I think that having a division title and winning a playoff game is extremely difficult to do. And I think it's something that would ultimately define your season as successful. The only area where it feels like coming up short hurts the most is that you did push all those chips in for Christian McCaffrey. And there obviously are long-term effects to that. And I don't think anybody can question the impact he had. The 49ers don't get as far as they do without McCaffrey. So I have no problem whatsoever with that move. But I think I even talked about it with you on here when it happened. Like, when you give up that kind of draft capital, when you pivot to where we're at now and you're looking forward to building towards next year and the future, that's really where it stings the most because you don't have that pick in the second round. You don't have that pick in the third round. You're missing this draft capital that you had already dipped into when you made that move up for Trey Lance. So I think when we look at things from like the bigger picture there, yes, it's successful because they overcame adversity. They made it to the playoffs with a 3rd-string rookie quarterback. They won a couple playoff games. It's a bit before my time, but I know there's a big chunk of the 49ers fan base where beating Dallas in itself is something that they can hold their head high for the rest of the postseason. It just feels like once they made that move for McCaffrey, there was always going to be this feeling of if they didn't ultimately win the Super Bowl, people would have a hard time feeling like it was a successful year. So I personally, in my subjective view, think any year that you make it to the playoffs and you win at least 1 playoff game, you had a good season. But I can fully appreciate and understand where somebody's coming away feeling like they fell short of the ultimate goal. Now they're depleted, with their draft capital, and they're moving into next year with this great roster. But who knows what's going on with the quarterback position? How can you call that successful? So I think it's successful, but I also feel like that, again, like you said, it's very subjective, and I completely understand anybody who might feel otherwise given all the circumstances.
I'm going to say successful because, they got back to the same spot they were last year, but it's a much better spot they're in today than they were last year. They have 2 young quarterbacks. Whether they trade one or not, they could eventually. They lack some picks early in the draft, but they could make a trade. I think they last year they were 19th in takeaways. This year they were 2. They did some really good things on defense. I think they're in a better spot as far as their roster and their depth and their assets than they were last year at this time. So, and they got to the conference title game again. So I'll say it was a successful year. But ultimately, if you want to sit there and say, like Parrot Let's Run Earth says, the last successful 49ers season was 1994, period. If you want to be that hard line about it, I get it. Hey, man, tell people if they go to Niners Nation right now what you have up, and tell people what you're going to be covering here for them at Niners Nation this week, the first week without 49er football.
Absolutely. So I have something up this morning that you can check out that's just kind of my feeling on just kind of the deflating emptiness that comes with the uncertainty of us being stuck on eternal hypotheticals on what could have happened if Brock Purdy didn't get hurt and what that game might have looked like. Would they have won the Super Bowl? And just kind of trying to vocalize that feeling and that gut punch that I think so many 49ers fans felt. And then the thing that I'm going to be working on today actually is, even though I think we can both agree, Larry, and most people watching can agree, the game was over when Purdy got hurt. Yeah. I think that there is a pattern of the 49ers having undisciplined penalties that are uncharacteristic of the talent and the discipline they normally show rear its head in bad times. And what I keep coming back to is kind of the season ended the way it started, where you go back to that game in Chicago week 1, I think they had 12 penalties in that game. And I think that's a major reason why they lost that game. And if that's the worst team in football, and I understand the weather conditions, I understand all those factors that played in, but a major reason they lost that game was that lack of discipline that reared its head in week 1. And the reality is, if the 49ers had won that game, they're hosting the NFC Championship game. And again, it comes back to the hypotheticals and a ton of different stuff. But that's an area with Kyle Shanahan. I even had an article last season about it, where it feels like there's a really big disparity in the talent and veteran leadership and the NFL experience on that roster, and the amount of undisciplined, inexcusable level of play that happens in big spots, whether it's unnecessary roughness penalties, running into the punter, not bring up Jordan Mason yesterday because I agree he got blocked into him, but just kind of penalties that you shouldn't have. So I'm kind of doing a deep dive on that, and then just trying to put a bow on this 49ers season the best I can. Admittedly, I am somebody where I love the game of football, and I appreciate any time that a team I am around the way I am with the 49ers is able to be in contention. So as much as I will probably focus on a lot of good things that happened this year, I also will try to focus on where things kind of went wrong and where I look to see them improve next year. So I'm hopefully going to put a bow on the season, and then everything's going to be off season after that. As it stands, I should be in Vegas this week for the Pro Bowl too. So I'll hopefully get some good coverage for you guys there and get some quotes from the 49ers players who will be there doing they have I don't know if you've seen, Larry, they're doing like the Pro Bowl games this year. It's like a way different format than it's been in recent years. So I'm hoping I can get some stuff from the guys that'll be down there and kind of get some closure on this season for fans, and anything I can provide you guys. And I'll be in the Combine in a few weeks as well. So I still will be doing stuff every day for Niners Nation. Hopefully can fill this gap before we get to OTAs and get some clarity on the season.
Great stuff. I'll give you my vote for my reasoning for why the 49ers have so many penalties is that I think they draft defensive players who have defensive mentalities. And so they have a lot of guys who really do love violence in their defenders, and they draft a lot of violent playing defensive players. And sometimes when you have a defensive mentality, that I have a feeling that sometimes it shows its ugly head. Sometimes that results in things that we don't want to see. And this, I think, is an example of that. Dre Greenlaw has a defensive mentality. Jimmy Ward has a defensive mentality. They like to hit. They like to be violent. And I think when you have players that really like to hit and play for the love of the game, I think you're playing for the right reasons. I think that's what people want to see. But I think, sometimes guys are right there on the edge, and, the game gets out of hand and they lose their focus and they want to go to that tendency to be violent. And sometimes that crosses lines. And I think that's what happens, because you got some really good, aggressive, physical football players who cross lines, and you can't do it. And they've done it, as you said, they did it week 1 against the Bears. It cost them the game. Who knows? It could have cost them other games as well. But I think you saw it in this game as well at the very end when things got out of hand. They just That's a lot of anger. A lot of anger was unleashed. All right, man. Always love rapping with you. Have a great rest of your night. Thanks for jumping in on the live stream, and hopefully maybe we'll get a chance maybe at the combine to pick your brain, get you back on, and kind of start looking ahead to the draft.
Absolutely. Do you mind if I ask you one more real quick on the way out? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah.
If Green Bay looks to move Rodgers and they're just done with it and they're like, you know what, we're going to go to Jordan Love, we're pivoting, and Rodgers wants to go to San Francisco and they're like, you know what, our asking price is your 2024 first round pick and it starts there. Are you moving that pick to bring in a guy like Rodgers and kind of maximize that window now? Or do you just say, you know what, we're going to move forward with Lance, the other options, and retain that draft capital? Because I know it's really hard. I love the draft, dude. So for me, it's really hard to envision building a team with not having a first round pick for 3 straight years. But I also think if that's the price to get it done, it creates a very interesting dialogue. I was just wondering what your thoughts might be on, if that's where the price starts.
Well, it's there without their number one this year and next year. Correct.
Next year they get it back. This is the last year without the number one.
Yeah. Or so it was last year and this year.
Yeah, and this year, yeah.
Last year and this year. I'd be open to it, but they're in a unique position because I think Trey is going to be ready to play, needs to play, but may not be ready to win. Purdy is ready to win, but may not be ready to play. And they may need to have another quarterback. And do you want that quarterback to be a kid in the draft? Probably not. You probably want it to be a veteran. So they're kind of in a unique pattern here where it's almost like they're almost definitely in the veteran, shopping lane, whether it be Rodgers or Brady, Lamar, Cousins, anybody who's a veteran who somehow Kyle likes, I think might, they may be in the market for. It's weird because Brady didn't look great this year, but I thought still didn't, to me, he didn't look super ancient. I thought he looked really good against the 49ers, despite the fact they got beat bad. Rodgers, to me, looks like he's aging and, faster, even though he's younger. And I don't know. I'm not sure Rodgers definitely is, I think has more football left, you would think, just by the age, but I don't know if that's the case. They kind of look like they're the same age. So I don't know. Rodgers, logically, you would say Rodgers would probably have more left in the tank, but Rodgers also requires at least a number one. What if they want a number one in Lance? Would you make that trade?
Yeah, and that's the thing is that's where if something like that comes to fruition, we'll find out really quickly how strongly the 49ers feel about Lance, because I'm of the mindset where if you're really convince yourself this is going to be the end of this window and that you need to go in now, that might be a move that you have to look at seriously making. But at the same time, it's hard for me to say because we've only gotten to see the practices we've seen and the couple games that we've seen. I just think it'd be very, very hard to turn down a scenario where you add a guy like Aaron Rodgers, who's a year removed from back-to-back MVPs, and inserting him into a team like this that I think is much more complete than any team he's ever had in Green Bay.
Yeah, no, I know. And the idea of Rodgers with these weapons and potentially what this defense could be, he's another guy who would be held in high regard for the rest of his life if he gets it done in a 49er jersey. Wow, that's a tough one. I'll say this offseason will not be dull. I mean, no Niner offseason ever is, but this one for sure promises to have lots of exciting twists and turns. Jordan, awesome stuff, man. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks for jumping in, man.
Thank you so much. Always a pleasure, Larry.
The great Jordan Elliott. He is phenomenal. He is absolutely phenomenal. All right. I teased this live stream as a Krueg taking calls, and then we had a bunch of people line up, and then I had Jordan jump in, and I went to Jordan, and I really didn't go to the calls. The calls dropped off. I just put the call link back in the chat. So I'm going live in 55 minutes on Grant's channel with Grant. But let's take some calls. I'm going to do this. I'm going to play the commercials for the show right here. And if you want to jump in, I know SOT and there were some other guys who wanted to jump in. Feel free to jump in on the video calls. Otherwise, we'll just read a few more chats. I'll give you a couple thoughts before I go. But let's have a word from our sponsors when we come back. If we've got some video calls on the line, we'll take them till the bottom of the hour. It's the Krueg Show on a Monday, rehashing the 49er game. And these are great days to talk, but also hard days to talk. You don't want to say things out of emotion that you don't mean. You don't want to crush people that don't deserve to be crushed. You don't want to sit there and exonerate everybody of all blame just because they have a better resume than you. I've never been the kind of person to be like, well, the head coach knows more football, so you can't question him. No, that's a bunch of crap. You can question him, and you can question the general manager as well. You can question anything you want to question. The quality of your questioning is based on the quality of your argument. So, how much you can actually point to, and your level of experience. I guarantee you at 6:00 when I go on with Grant, he's going to have criticisms probably for Kyle Shanahan that I don't share. So we may bang heads a little bit today on his live stream. We'll see. We always seem like we come to common ground. We don't necessarily agree on everything, but if you want to jump in, I'd love to hear from the fans as far as, real Niner fans who watch the game and have been fans for years and have this in somewhat perspective, right? If you're one of these guys that's just going to jump up and down and scream bloody murder, maybe I'll take you for a second, but basically we're moving on. I don't really need that, but I would love to hear your thoughts on this game. I mean, I have never seen a worse game. Why? Because you win some games you win, some games you lose. But usually the ratio of the amount of time watching to when you're going to lose, especially if you have a good team, is very little, right? You either win or you lose, but it was close at the end. If you're a 49er fan, they don't get housed. They don't get blown out. They don't get run out of the building very often. So what does that mean? That means that when the game's over, we usually have 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes, 10, 15 max, where you're sitting there watching a game that your team's going to lose, and it's frustrating as hell. We had the entire 3 hours yesterday. Everybody knew the game was over once Purdy went out. We knew Purdy was out after 6 offensive plays for the Niners. We kind of figured he was done before the end of the first half and that he was not coming back. That's a long freaking time to watch that football game and just know you're going to lose. You didn't know how it was going to happen, but you knew they were going to lose. So I thought yesterday was the worst Niner game I've seen in years, because we're sitting there for 3 hours knowing we're going to lose, looking at all these Eagle fans acting like they've done something incredible. They beat nobody. You beat the New York Giants at home, and you beat Josh Johnson-led Niners. Kansas City's going to wipe the floor with the Eagles in the Super Bowl. Unless Kansas City is way, way, way more hurt than I realize, Kansas City's going to win that game. And the fact that you're getting points is crazy. All right, let me do this. Let me pay the bills. We got a couple minutes of spots. I'm going to get a glass of water. I'm going to come back. Then we got William. We got David. We got people hanging who want to take some video calls. We'll hit that next on the Krueg Show.
Larry Krueger here for Telmetrics. Thanks to Casey Bateman and the good people at Telmetrics. If you're an occupational therapist, if you're an orthopedic surgeon, a chiropractor, a physical therapist of any kind, Telmetrics is designed for you to use in your practice and will greatly benefit your patients. Telmetrics uses computer vision and artificial intelligence and provides a platform for outpatient rehab therapy services, both in the clinical and the telehealth environments. So using Telmetrics can improve your patient's experience and much more. So for all your sports injury needs, or if you're a physical rehabilitation specialist of any kind, make sure you use telmetrics.co, Telmetrix.co. And thanks to Casey Bateman and all the good people at Telmetrics for being a proud sponsor of the Krueg. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Dan Coach Emilio. Dan is a buddy, and he is a phenomenal retirement planning specialist. And you can contact him today at securemoney.com or at his number 925-628-9966. There's a lot of uncertainty in our world right now, and you want to make sure that your money is secure. That is the key. Danny's got 25 years of experience, born and raised right here in the Bay Area, and he can help you get an immediate 10% premium bonus on your principal retirement account. So give him a call, 925-628-9966. He'll make an appointment with you, and you can sit down. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of a deal. He'll consult with you and come up with a strategy to get you going to where you want to be. Once again, 925-628-9966, securemoney.com on the web. And And thanks to Tony Casera and the good people at Casera's Italian Menswear. They are housing the Krueg Show t-shirts, and they're a proud sponsor of the show as well. The Krueg Show t-shirt, the Krueg Show podcast t-shirt is available there at their store in Dublin. Their address is 7372 San Ramon Road in Dublin, California. And go see Tony Casera and get yourself a Krueg Show t-shirt and support the show. And special thanks to our sponsor, New York Style Italian Sausage. That's right, NewYorkStyleSausage.com is their website. Phenomenal product, whether it's the breakfast sausage, the Italian mild, the Italian spicy, the chorizo. You cannot go wrong with New York Style Italian Sausage. Once again, NewYorkStyleSausage.com. Often imitated, never equaled.
All right, welcome back to the Krueg Show on a Monday. Still 400 people plus in the chat, and we are 2 hours and 1 minute into our live stream. Thank you once again to Jordan Elliott. Check him out, Niners Nation, really cool spot. They have a lot of great Niner content. My man Kyle Posey runs that thing, but they've got some really, really good people. And Jordan's one of them and does an incredible job covering the Niners. All right, let's do this. I think David jumped in first. So we'll hit David first and add him to the stream. David, how you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good, man. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. What'd you think of the game? Obviously a rough one. Give me your thought.
Man, I think it was a horrible game. We had a bad game, but after like you were saying, after Brock Purdy went down, I think they gave up. And the defense didn't play that well either. So, and the referee is making some bad calls on us. Looked like they didn't want to.
It was everything, wasn't it? I mean, it was literally everything. The refs made bad calls. There's no doubt about that. How many times did Lane Johnson false start? It was like this guy's a serial false starter, and that's it's okay because. And I hear Baldinger. God bless Baldinger, but Baldinger is a total eagle, and he's telling everybody that Lane Johnson just has awesome, reaction time. No, it's called a false start. That's a false freaking start. All right. I mean, don't tell me that he's got, incredible reactions. He is anticipating. Yeah, he's moving before the ball is snapped, Brian. That's a penalty. All right. Yeah. Don't tell me about Lane Johnson's quick twitch. That's what he's going. He's going with the quick twitch. I was getting a twitchy eye listening to that crap. All right, there you go.
And he said he couldn't hear the play. So it's like, come on, you need this. I know we were playing away, and the crowd was like making too much noise. You can't hear. Just call the timeout if you can't hear.
No, I hear you. David, let me jump, man. Everybody's in the chat here, but I appreciate you jumping in. Let's go to William, who add William to the stream. Hey, William, how are you, man?
Hey, how you doing, Larry?
Appreciate. Where are you coming from? Are you a Bay guy? Are you from other parts of the country?
Well, I'm actually here in D.C.
Okay, the district. Been there. Love the district.
Yeah, I just want to say it was several things I heard while I was streaming your live stream when I was on my way home driving. Yeah. And I just want to say that last year, I was on Rob Shoot and Grant Show, and I was telling how big a loss DJ Jones was gonna be for us. I said, I think people don't really realize that. People are like, oh, DJ Jones. I said, no, you gotta understand how exceptional DJ Jones is. He's not that big name and all that you're hearing about everybody else. But DJ Jones is ridiculously talented. It's a reason that Russell Wilson immediately said, "Go get DJ Jones and bring him and make him a Bronco."
DJ Jones figured out a way to get away from Kinlaw. That was their big mistake.
Nothing against him, hey, everybody they dreams, but Kinlaw has been one of the biggest busts that the Niners have made in years. I mean, from knowing that he already had a knee issue, and that has been keeping him off the field. He's like our new Ford. Like, oh, you can only play him but so much. His health just doesn't be there. And the way he was just to be a number 1 draft pick, you would not tell. You could not tell me that that's a number 1 draft pick the way he's been playing. And I understand people say, no, throughout the season, he hasn't looked that bad, but he hasn't looked that good. Even when you gave him a whole season to get his knee right, he came back in and a couple games, he's out again, knee issue. I just don't get it.
He doesn't get. Here's the bottom line: he gets nothing done. Nothing. You know, he's for the year. He's been given for the year 4 tackles.
Larry, he's
0 sacks. 0 forced fumbles, 0 fumble recoveries, 0 interceptions, 0 touchdowns, 0.
I mean,
0.
He's an exceptional college player. And people don't understand that. Everybody doesn't translate to the NFL. He's an exceptional college player, but even
he's
in
very
college,
strong physically, but it's not functional football strength.
Exactly. Not when it comes to where you gotta actually have a technique. He just gets manhandled. You wouldn't
he's
even
getting nothing done.
It's
not personal. It's not personal.
Not
I like him. I've interviewed him a couple times. I like him. I think he's interesting. He's got a lot of interesting answers. He's not getting anything done.
He's just not. And not only, and we really lost out when we lost DJ Jones. Lakin Thompson, I say, yeah, he's overpriced. Anybody you sit next to Trent Williams are gonna shine. That's why I wasn't worried about Eric Banks.
Banks has probably been as good.
But Kinlaw, oh my goodness. And losing DJ Jones up that middle, you definitely see the absence. So
my one hope, William, is that maybe because Denver might have some cap problems, different regimes, coaches coming and going, maybe they cut DJ loose in a year and the Niners can grab him back up. DJ had unbelievable functional strength. He was only 6'1", but he was 6'1", 320. He had a little bit of pass rush and a lot of strength. And you could not move him. You could not run in the A gaps.
He was fast. I don't think people realize how fast DJ Jones was. He used to run Russell Wilson down.
Yeah. And he's the strongest guy on the team.
It was just a sad thing to lose him.
Yeah, it really was. And they let him go because they had Kinlaw. But just because you had Kinlaw, just because Lynch invested in number 1, it's like you gotta stay with when you find a player, doesn't matter where you draft him. We should learn that from Purdy. When you find a player, you keep your good players. DJ was a very good player. There was no reason to let him go.
We lost 2 exceptional players for Kinlaw. We lost Buckner and we lost DJ Jones.
Yep.
That's how they was in on Kinlaw.
You don't part with impact defensive tackles.
Ever.
The Chiefs aren't trading Chris Jones, right?
I'm gonna tell people, and I'm gonna make this real quick because I know there's other people in the chat. Yeah. Watching that game hurt me so bad because it wasn't like we got beat. If we would have just got beaten, Philly was just a better team. I can eat that. But to see that our quarterback went down and we just had nothing. Yeah. And I don't care how you disguise a run, it's a run. It takes me all the way back to when we lost our running back against Atlanta and all we could do was throw. They knew we had, and we were like the number 1 running team against them when they had Jamal Anderson and the Dirty Bird and all that.
Yeah, talking about the Garrison Hurst days, right?
Yes, that was reliving. I was like, we had no quarterback. No. And as to nothing against the guy who came before me, but the defense did not play crappy. The defense was out there the whole game. Let you play a whole game with no rest and the refs calling all types of wild plays. You will get frustrated. But
The defense did what they had to do. They need to upgrade in some spots. That's why I'm talking about Kinlaw. That's why you're talking about Kinlaw. But the defense was fine. They lost their quarterback, and the game was over.
It was over.
I don't blame the Niners for brawling. I don't blame the defense for giving up what they gave up. Everybody just had, I don't blame McCaffrey had a courageous run. That was an incredible touchdown run. They just ran out of players.
Just imagine with that and what the defense did. If we had a quarterback in that game, we would have won the game. I doubt we would have won it. But it is what it is. Hopefully, everything will work out in our favor in the off season. Hopefully, there'll be a great quarterback rivalry between Brock Purdy and Trey Lance. Hopefully, this year is the year that Trey Lance actually see it, because I think the only problem that Trey Lance has been having is processing. I think he's smart, but
he is smart.
But
he's smart and he's athletic and he's talented and he'll get it. It's just going to take some time.
Right. His touch, he got to develop. See, Brock has the touch from experience in college.
Right.
Lance just needs to learn those little touch passes. If Trey Lance can get those touch passes and Cal can call that same type of offense, he's been calling for Jimmy, he's been calling for Brock. I'm telling you, I think Trey Lance will be a star for us. But he just got to get the reps.
He needs reps. He needs reps before we're going to really find out where he's at. William, great stuff. Have you been checking us out at all during our live streams? It's the first time we've had you on the calls.
Yeah, I have. I just been working myself, been really busy, so I haven't been able to get on Grant's or Rob's shoes or Jesse's call in as much. I try to swing in there and throw a chat in there every now and then, but my agency just split into 2 agencies, so I've been really busy.
You're a busy man. Hey, William, we'll let you go, man. Thanks for finding us, and anytime I'm going live and taking calls, jump in. We'd love to hear from you.
One last thing.
Yeah.
Like, subscribe, and hit that notification for Larry. It's a good dude. I am.
There you go. William Bennett from DC. I like that. 49er George. We'll add 49er George to the live stream. I'm loving the beanie. How are you, man?
Hey, thanks, Larry. I'm doing great, man. Thanks for taking my call.
Do you have your own pod?
No, I don't, but I'm involved in a lot of content creation for NCAA stuff and a little bit of college stuff. But I've been watching you, and listening to you KMBR forever, man.
Appreciate you, man. What did you think of the game? Your mic kind of jumped and went down a couple times. It got loud and then it went quiet.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's rattling on you.
Yeah, that's good.
So
how you been?
Yeah.
What's your thought on the game? It was obviously an ugly game.
Yeah, one of the hardest games to watch. I'm just a little bit disappointed that the 49ers give out so many red shirts to rookies. It's just like
who you thinking of?
I mean, Price, where's Price? Where's Gray? I saw him on the field once. It's like we're not getting production from our rookies. And then other guys who, Burford's out there, but, he's kind of thrown out to the wolves just because they hadn't invested in that area earlier. And you guys talked about Kinlaw already. I was a Wirfs guy from the beginning before that pick was made.
Right.
Yeah. And then you just,
Tampa.
Oh, he was the best at Iowa. That was just it would have been an easy grab. You could have moved him over to left after.
He would have been a blue chip tackle for the next 10 years.
Bookends, and then you could put any quarterback back there and they're going to feel comfortable. But anyways, I wish we could get more from the guys that we draft. And, we got to start hitting on guys. We get some guys like Brock and we get some guys like Kittle down there in the lower, but we've invested in Trey Sermon was shown the door so early. It's like,
yeah,
okay, he didn't. Yeah, it's like, he didn't show you what you wanted, but we could have gotten more from him. Did he really get that fair shot? And what is it with the doghouse? What are they not telling us? What is that? I know you cover the team really close, so it might be a little bit too political, but it's like
no, you don't mean, man. I'll let it fly if I agree or disagree.
From
what do I think's going on there? I think Bobby Turner is, given a lot of power. And if he likes a guy, that guy thrives. If Bobby T doesn't like that guy, I think, that's what happened with Sermon. I think Bobby T likes running backs that hit the ground and hit the hole now. So like he would have loved like a Frank Gore, let's say. A guy like Le'Veon Bell or Trey Sermon, who kind of surveys the hole, and they're more rhythm runners, and they get in unbelievable rhythms, and it's like, wow, you can't stop the guy. The NFL, you'd have to be a great talent to get the kind of run totals, run attempts that it takes these guys to get into rhythm. So it works for a while, but you got to hit the hole and you got to make it go fast. And Sermon, I thought, did a little too much dancing and it didn't hit the hole fast enough. And where a guy like, JP Mason is a powerhouse back. Now he runs upright and takes hits, but he hits that hole. Now they didn't give him a lot of run this year because they probably didn't trust his pass blocking. But, I think that's what they didn't like about Sermon. They thought he's a little too much finesse, a little too much pick and slide, a little too much, they want put your foot in the ground and go. And he's never, ever going to be quite what they wanted. And I think they moved on. I just don't think it was a great fit, but I also agree that if it wasn't a great fit, then maybe that conversation should have been had. I don't know, like maybe the night before day 2 of the draft, when you were talking about drafting him, maybe somebody ought to said this guy kind of is a rhythm runner who kind of sets up his runs and likes to dance. Bobby, are you cool with that? There's obviously all these guys are privy to all these evaluations. So I don't know how they draft a back like that when it's clear that he doesn't have the skill set that the running back coach wants and demands.
At the beginning of the year, Charlie Warner had that, I guess it was like a hernia or some sort of like core injury. So he was like out of the first game. Trey Lance overthrew him on that pass, and everybody really was after Trey Lance for him overthrowing Croft. I think it was Croft.
It was Croft,
yeah, and then I mean, I don't even think Croft makes the team if Charlie Warner didn't have that injury at the beginning of the year. So now he's being asked to block Reddick. It's like there's a theme of like not protecting the quarterbacks in particular, running backs too, but like quarterbacks in particular. And there's got to be a shift there. Otherwise, we'll never get over that hump. We're getting there, but we'll never get over that hump. And last mention here, Larry, it's not a shot at all, but just I really do think that a quarterback, the two quarterbacks being there in camp as they're healing, I think that's the best scenario for the 49ers going forward with everything unreasonably that's happened. I think
do you want a third guy in there, or do you want to just
absolutely? We need a fourth guy in there, but
I mean, I don't know. Like right now, who's more likely to be healthy, Trey or Brock? I don't even know.
Yeah, Trey having that boot and the second surgery.
Right.
Yeah.
And Brock's, 6 months, but it could be 6 months, could be 8 months. Who knows?
He was so
I don't even
pleasing
know it's
to
a
watch.
ligament thing. Who knows how he's going to throw coming off of it? There's a lot of questions here for sure. There's a lot of questions at the quarterback spot. It might just be they have to, make some tough decisions, and maybe they have to bring in a veteran. Maybe they have to trade somebody. I don't know. I'm not sure what the answer is, but I would say this. I'm not willing to trade Brock, and I would really hate to trade Trey. So I'm sure Lynch probably feels the same way. So I don't know what's going to happen. I really don't, but it's a tough one. It absolutely is. 49er George, we'll let you get on with the rest of your night, but thanks for jumping in on this. And hey man, this is the first time we've seen you in here. If I'm going live and taking calls, I'm going to do a lot of that this off season. Jump in, man. We'd love to get your feedback as step by step as they go through this off season.
Hey Larry, you're the best. Thanks, man.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you. Have a great rest of your night. Let's go to Bruce, who's back with us. Bruce has been with us before. Hey, Bruce, how are you?
All right, how you doing?
Well, it was a crappy game, man. It was an absolute crappy game. And it's tough to talk on days like this. Sometimes I like my wife's like, hey, you gonna, go live? And I'm like, you know what? I don't even want to talk to people today. I don't really want to do, but then, it's like I start thinking about it and I'm like, you know what? I always feel better after I talk about it anyway. And,
Definitely.
it's like the one thing about the Niner community is man, so many people have given to this channel in the last during this football season. We've given a lot of content out, but a lot of people have given us a lot, and I just didn't want to go AWOL on everybody for on the biggest talking Niner day of the year. I wanted to give people a place to chat, a place to jump in and give us their video call, breakdown, and maybe it'll be therapeutic for me to kind of go through it. So anyway, and I'll be doing more talking at the top of the hour with Grant on his channel, and then again tonight with Nick Newman at 8:30 on my channel. So, but go ahead. What'd you think of it, Bruce? It was an ugly game, that's for sure.
Just to kind of echo what a lot of other people are saying, it was tough to watch. I mean, in the sense of like after Purdy went out, you knew the game was over, and it was like the build up for a heavyweight fight. You pay, $79.99 for a heavyweight fight, and it's just a whimper of a fight. Like that's kind of how it was. I mean, I wanted to see how we matched up against Philly. If they had beat us, it would have been like, yes, I'd have been disappointed, but it would have been different if it would have been a fair fight. The fact that the refs let guys play the first few games of the playoffs, and this game, all of a sudden, we just see flag happy. There's flags everywhere, which way, which was definitely disappointing. And just knowing the outcome, you just knew the Niners weren't going to win. It was a great moment when McCaffrey had that run, but the defense was just on the field too long. It was like nothing positive was going to come out of it. If anything, if I want to say, all right, what's the positive? Is the NFC is still wide open. NFC is still wide open. Next year, the Eagles, they have a lot of, they have a lot of free agents. Like a lot of their defensive guys are free agents, and they're going to have to pay Hurts $40 million a year. What happens with them? And
the Niners are. I think the Niners are one of. I mean, who are the contenders? If we actually said, okay, it's the NFL. Who are the contenders in the NFC going forward? Okay, if we're looking at this thing objectively, probably Philly. They got two number ones. They got Jalen Hurts. I think the New York Giants are probably going to get better, but who's their quarterback? In the NFC North, I think the Lions are clearly getting better. The Bears are getting better. But nobody's like really coming there. Tampa has no young quarterback. Who's the young quarterback that scares you in the NFC South? I don't see one. Seahawks, I don't know. Rams have cap problems. Yeah, I mean, I would say the 49ers, if they have a good offseason, and they're going to be them in Philly, probably are going to be the class of the conference. The Niners could wind up with the right 5 or 6 maneuvers. The Niners could wind up in 5 of the next 6 Super Bowls. I mean, that's how good they are compared to the rest of this conference. They're in a great spot. They're going to have a ton of success, but they gotta find an offensive tackle. They gotta find a defensive tackle, and they probably got to find a true number 1 corner
and an edge rusher opposite Bosa. I mean, the pass rush just disappeared the last 4 to 5 weeks of the season. I mean, and it's tough. I mean, I don't think Bosa was 100%. I mean, he, I don't know how bad his groin was. I mean, he came back, he had to, fight through it, but it was just like there was really no pass rush. And then again, with someone like Hurts, you don't want to go too hard and give him the run lanes there. So I think that the way they were rushing him, I mean, they contained him. They contained Hurts for I mean, I'm not impressed. I'm sorry.
Philly didn't do anything, but how much of that was them shutting it down, being extra vanilla, knowing that they didn't need to do much to beat the Niners? That's the one thing. I'll say this. After watching Philly, I was very impressed by Gainwell. Gainwell is nice. No question.
He changed the game. He
can catch it.
He's
nice. He's a nice player. I mean, there's no question. He can catch it. He can run it. I like what I saw from Gainwell. They got a really good physical offensive line, and they got some great individual defensive players.
Fletcher Cox is a free agent.
He's old.
I mean, they got a lot. Graham. I mean, a lot of Linval Joseph. It's like, okay, once you pay Hurts, how are you going to fill out the rest of the team? That's the other thing I'm just kind of thinking about. And like you said,
yeah. I mean, Roseman's good. They're going to do a good job. I would say the Niners and the Eagles, and I don't know who the third team is, but probably the Niners and the Eagles and maybe one other team will be the contenders in the NFC going forward. But the Niners are in a great spot, absolutely great spot. I mean, Lynch has got a deep roster. They got a bunch of picks. They don't have a one or a two, but they do have an extra quarterback they could trade if they wanted to. And you know, they've been a contender, so I think teams are going to want to sign with them, veteran players. They'll probably be able to get people in free agency to take a little less. They got one free agent quarterback in Brady, who probably would be willing to take less to come home, and they may need him. They may need him. They definitely are going to need another quarterback besides Purdy or Lance next year, and it's not going to be Garoppolo. So it probably is going to be a Brady. Maybe it is going to be a Rodgers. I can't imagine it would be Rodgers from the standpoint of I can't think that Green Bay would actually trade Rodgers to the Niners. I don't see that. So it's really more about Brady. But Brady makes sense. Brady makes sense. And people saying we don't need Brady, your quarterback next year could wind up being not Lance or Purdy. And then what do you got? You got nothing. So yes, you do need another quarterback.
And you don't want to lose the locker room. I mean, again, if Purdy didn't get hurt, win, lose, or draw, whatever, him and Purdy would have been the starter. Lance would have been able to compete. Now it's like Lance is going to he's going to come back hobbled. You don't want to rush Purdy back. You need to have a proven guy. And I think Brady's like the perfect bridge because now the locker room will still work for Brady. You bring in, a Minshew or somebody else, the locker room's not going to really like that. They're not going to really like,
they can stay with Jimmy. You keep Jimmy around.
Him smiling on the sideline yesterday just hurt me. Like
I know. I mean, last night when people brought that up, I was like, I don't care. I don't care because guys smile on the sidelines for all kinds of reasons. But I'll just say this: it's like smiling at a funeral.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to do it, but don't get caught in a photo. I mean, you look. It's just, and also, if anybody who just lost somebody, sees you, and you're smiling, bad. It's bad optics. It looks bad. So I don't know. And everybody he knows
smiling,
better. He knows
if
better.
He was smiling, talking to Purdy, and they're smiling with each other or something, it's a little different. But the fact that like you're the guy who couldn't get it done, you're done, you're smiling on the sideline, and the camera just happens to get you. It just doesn't. It just like you say, this doesn't look good.
Look good.
Don't bring him back.
It's not the end of the world. Like if I'm a player on the team, some people are like, somebody ought to get in his face or something. Come on,
not that.
Nobody needs to get in anybody's face. But it is kind of like, bro. Come on, it's a bad look. Hey, Bruce, let me jump because I've got to get ready for the live stream tonight with Grant.
All right,
but thanks for jumping in, man.
On today.
Yep, have a good day. We got Greg T. We'll just do a minute with Greg T. Greg, man, I got to jump because been on already for 2.5 hours, man. But I definitely saw you back there, and I didn't want to leave you back there. Give me your thought on yesterday.
Well, I thought it was a horrible game. I thought it was terrible. You guys covered all. You guys covered all that earlier today. I was listening to you in the car. And so the only reason I jumped on was 2 questions I got for you.
Yeah, go
One is, it seems like you really don't care that much for Trey. It seems like every time there's
Trey. I was more pro Trey than pro Purdy. I love Trey. I absolutely wanted Trey in the draft, and I still think Trey is going to be a really good NFL quarterback, but it's really clear to me that it's not going to happen soon. It's going to take time. And I don't see the 49ers fan base, coaching staff, or locker room ever in a mode to give him the time that he's going to need, unless he shows up next year in camp worlds more kind of adept on the nuances of the position than he demonstrated in camp this summer or in preseason this summer.
Even you think there's no chance, even though we go through a lot of quarterbacks?
No, I'm just saying there's a chance because from what I'm hearing, they're going to take a cap hit if they wanted to trade him. And if to trade him at this point would not be getting full value. I just look at the NFL and how bad the quarterbacks are and how good, exciting he is as a prospect. And I just think that there's somebody who's going to come armed with a number one draft choice who wants him. And then that's going to be too hard for me to pass up if that actually happens. And I'm also banking on this, Greg, is I think that somehow, some way, if either the Niners had Brady or if Purdy were healthy and it was going to be Purdy, I don't think Trey wants to be the number 2 guy here. I think he would like to join Rand Carthon in Tennessee or go somewhere else where he could be kind of like fresh start, you're the guy. Where I don't think he wants to sit behind Brock, and I don't think he wants to wait another year for Brady. So if the Niners either want to commit to Brock or dance with Brady, if I'm Trey's reps, I'm calling John Lynch and saying, "Love you, John, but can you send me somewhere?"
Okay, all right.
But I like Trey. I really like Trey's potential. I just think it's going to take time. I think it might take. If you ask me when's he going to be good, I would say it's going to take probably a full year of playing the position, and then the next training camp, and then you're going to have a player that's kind of NFL ready. So I think he's going to need, and I don't see the Niner players, coaches, or fans giving him that redshirt year. Do you?
No. Well, I don't know. I think I think the way we go through quarterbacks, he's going to get time to play. If it's enough time, I don't know. But
it's frustrating because I know that Trey has the athleticism, the intelligence, and the desire to do it, but he's FCS. He needs to there's nuances. His ball is a rocket and has all kinds of wobble, and it's a very difficult ball to catch. I see great traits there, and I would want to coach him up because I think football is important to him, and he's got everything you need. But he needs to play, and some of that's going to include failure. And I don't know that the team that he plays for is going to win right away. That would be my.
All right. So, hey, one other question, and I know you got to go. I know you got the thing with Grant. And Grant is actually the question I want to ask you. He's going to say something tonight about Shanahan going through all these quarterbacks. Have you thought about that at all? Do you think there's anything to that? And I don't want to, I haven't listened to him, but I've listened to him enough to know that's probably what he's going to say. And so, are you ready?
Why? Yeah, I mean, why have the 49ers gone through a bunch of quarterbacks?
Yeah, that's the question. That's the $1 billion question,
Is it that they put their quarterbacks in harm's way more than other teams? Is it their offensive line is not good enough? Is it that they've invested so heavily in their defensive line to a degree where some of those picks should have gone on guys like Tristan Wirfs instead of Javon Kinlaw? Did they draft so many defensive tackles over offensive tackles that now it's Trent and kind of a makeshift group? It could be they haven't invested enough in their offensive line. Could be that I don't think there's anything really like about their process that makes their quarterbacks get hurt. I think there are a lot of, I've read the stats earlier in the live stream, but there's a lot of quarterbacks who have gotten hurt this year.
But nobody's lost 4.
Nobody's lost 4.
So I just wonder, and I know you got to go, but I just wonder if it's a strategy, if it's the way the offense works, he puts quarterbacks in positions to get hurt. Not intentionally, he's not trying to get anyone hurt. And I'm not saying I want to get Shanahan gone. He's a great coach, and we're really fortunate to have him. But I just wonder if it's schematic. And I was just going to ask. That's all.
Well, even pre-Shanahan, so this year, Jimmy G played 10 games. Purdy played 8 games. Trey Lance played 2 games. Last year, Jimmy G played 18 games. Lance played 2 games. The year before that, Mullins played 8. Jimmy played 6. And who was the other person? CB? Who's CB? Oh,
Beathard?
TJ Beathard played 3. And then 2019, Jimmy G played 19 games, and they went to the Super Bowl. That was his healthy year. The year before Jimmy, Mullins played 8. Beathard played 5.
Jimmy played 5.
And Jimmy played 3 in 2018. 2017, Hoyer played 6. Beathard played 5. Jimmy played 5. 2016, Cap played 11. And Blaine Gabbert played 5. 2015, Cap played 8, Gabbert played 8. I mean, and those were pre-Shanahan, as you well know. I don't know.
Some of those.
I don't know if there's any real answer
Okay.
other than the Niners maybe have invested too heavily in the defensive line and not heavily enough in the offensive line. And that would be my view from above, you know.
Okay. That's the question. That's the question I took away from the game.
Go ahead.
That was my question from the game. Is it something that Shanahan's doing that's putting quarterbacks in positions to get hurt, or if it's the offensive line just not good enough, or the quarterback's not good enough? But
I'll say this too. I mean, I always blame the players and over the scheme. And I'll say this: I don't think that Croft did anything wrong. If he had released that player on the inside, then that's a mistake. It's partly on Purdy to get that clock going and get that ball out a little sooner. And especially, you know, you got to know where your weakness is, and Croft on Reddick is your weakness. So you probably should have been peaking a little bit there, but it's a big moment. He's got a lot in his head. I don't think Croft whiffed, but I don't think Croft's a stellar blocker. So I will say this, that tight end spot is one of the spots that I absolutely want to get a second, you know, starting caliber tight end in this draft, because to me, as I said before, Kittle's a 1, but I think Warner is more of a 3. I think Dwelly's a 3-4. I think Croft is a 3-4, and they don't have a 2. You know, so
and they need a 2, and they need a 2
at that spot.
All right,
as much as they use the tight end, they need a 2.
All right. Well, hey, I'll be watching you when you go to Grant. Have fun.
Thanks, Greg. Have a great night, man. Go Niners. It's Greg hanging out. We got this last super chat. Really enjoy your content, Larry, from Joshua. He says, seemed like after Smith's catch, that wasn't the cards were stacked against the Niners. Purdy injury sealed it. Well said. Absolutely well said. All right. We're 12 minutes away from me joining Grant. Thanks to all the people in the chat. Still 400 people in the room. I appreciate every single one of you. Grant and I will go from 6 o'clock until whatever time he wants to stop. And then at 8:30 tonight, Nick Newman, who's a very passionate 49er fan. Check him out on Twitter. He's going to join me for a live stream, and maybe we'll have Dan and Reyes joining us as well. We'll get everybody's thoughts. But have a great rest of your night. Join me in 12 minutes on the Grant Cohn channel for a live stream talking more Niner football. Until then.
Yeah, never met a man I've been scared of. Careful, you won't get exactly what you asked for. Here for whatever you bring me, getting handled. I answer to no one.